Lila Hart has 72 hours before she becomes property, bought, branded, and buried alive in a marriage that's really a bill of sale. So she does the one thing a desperate girl can do. She steals herself. One battered carpet bag, $17, and the old mare that's loved her longer than any human ever has. By the time Red Willow wakes up, she'll be dust on the horizon. But the desert doesn't care about freedom. It only cares about survival. And the man she meets out there, Cole Rourke, a drifter with blood on his hands and a bounty on his head, might be the most dangerous choice she's ever made. Will Lila outrun the man who bought her, or will the wilderness claim her first? Stay until the end to find out. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Lila's story rides. The night Lila Hart decided to steal her own life back, the moon hung like a broken promise over Red Willow, New Mexico territory. She moved through the boarding house with the careful silence of someone who'd learned young that noise brought trouble. Her carpetbag sat already packed beneath the narrow bed, had been packed for 3 days, ever since her Uncle Silas came home with that look on his face. The look that said he'd made a deal. The look that said she was the collateral. Lila's hands trembled as she buckled the worn leather straps. $17 in coins, wrapped in a handkerchief that had been her mother's. 2 dresses, both faded, a tintype of parents she barely remembered, and tucked in the very bottom, beneath a layer of undergarments, the small derringer her mother had hidden in a flour tin years ago, unloaded, because Lila had never been able to afford bullets, but maybe enough to bluff with if it came to that. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. The floorboards creaked as she stood, and Lila froze, heart hammering against her ribs like a wild bird against cage wire. Down the hall, Silas snored in drunken oblivion, the same way he'd snored through her childhood, through her mother's death, through every moment that might have required him to be something other than a user of people. 3 days ago, he'd sold her to Briggs Mallory for $600 and the forgiveness of his gambling debts. Lila had smiled and nodded when Mallory came to inspect his purchase, had let the man's wet eyes crawl over her like slugs on stone, had endured his thick fingers tilting her chin up to check her teeth as if she were livestock. 23 years old, Mallory was already a widower, though nobody in Red Willow spoke about how his first wife had died with bruises nobody could explain. Money bought silence in a town this small. Money bought everything, including girls who had no one to say no on their behalf. But Lila could say no. She could say it with her feet. She slipped down the back stairs, avoiding the third step that always groaned, and emerged into the cool desert night. The air smelled of sage and dust and possibility. Above, stars scattered across the darkness like spilled salt, indifferent and eternal. The stable sat 50 yards behind the boarding house, and Lila made herself walk calmly, as if she had every right to be there at 2 a.m. She'd learned that too, that if you acted like you belonged, people often believed you. Juniper nickered softly when Lila entered the stable, and the sound nearly broke her. The mare was 16 years old, gray-muzzled and swayback, the only creature in this world that had been gentle with Lila without expecting anything in return. Her mother had bought Juniper with egg money, back when there'd still been a mother, back when the world had felt less like a trap. "Hey, old girl," Lila whispered, pressing her forehead against the mare's warm neck. "We're going for a ride, a long one." She saddled Juniper with practiced hands, fingers working by memory in the darkness. The saddle was worn smooth, the leather cracked, but still strong. Good enough. It would have to be good enough because there was no going back now, no second chance at this particular flavor of courage. Lila led Juniper out through the back gate, still walking calmly, still pretending she had permission for this. Only when they cleared the last building did she mount up, settling into the saddle with her carpetbag tied behind her and the whole impossible desert spreading out ahead. She didn't look back at Red Willow. Looking back was how Lot's wife had turned to salt, and Lila intended to stay flesh and blood and free. The desert at night was a different creature than the desert by day. Cooler, quieter, full of small sounds that made Lila's skin prickle with awareness. Juniper's hooves crunched on Calician sand, steady and sure, despite her age. Lila had a canteen, half full, and a general sense that if she rode northeast, she'd eventually hit the stage road that ran toward Roswell. From there, maybe she could find work. Maybe she could disappear into the kind of anonymity that towns with strangers allowed. Maybe was a thin word to stake your life on, but it was all she had. The hours blurred together. Lila rode through the darkness, through the slow wheel of stars overhead, through the gradual graying of the eastern horizon that meant dawn was coming whether she was ready or not. Her thighs ached. Her back ached. The empty places in her stomach had started to ache too, but she'd been hungry before. Hunger was an old companion, almost a friend. What she hadn't counted on was the heat. By mid-morning, the sun had become a physical weight pressing down on her skull. The air shimmered and danced, turning the landscape into something liquid and unreliable. Leila had draped her shawl over her head for protection, but it helped only slightly. Juniper's pace had slowed to a trudging walk, head low, sides heaving with effort. The canteen was empty. Lila shook it one more time, as if water might materialize through sheer wanting, but only a few drops touched her cracked lips. She'd rationed it carefully, or thought she had, but careful didn't matter when there simply wasn't enough. "I'm sorry, girl," she murmured, running a hand down Juniper's neck. The mare's coat was dark with sweat, her breathing labored. "I'm so sorry." They needed water, soon, but the desert offered nothing. Just endless scrub and rock and the vast, indifferent sky. Lila's vision started to blur at the edges. She blinked hard, trying to focus, but the horizon kept swimming away from her. Thirst made her tongue feel thick, her thoughts slow and sticky. She'd heard stories about people who died in the desert, their bodies mummified by heat and dryness until they were just leather and bone. She thought those stories were exaggerations, tall tales told to scare children. She wasn't sure anymore. It was Juniper who saw the rider first. The mare's ears pricked forward, her head lifting despite exhaustion, and Lila followed her gaze to the ridgeline, maybe 200 yards north. A man on horseback, silhouetted against the brutal blue sky. Lila's first instinct was to run, but Juniper was too tired, and there was nowhere to run to anyway. Her second instinct was to reach for the derringer in her carpet bag, and her shaking hands managed to find it, managed to pull it free even though her fingers felt like sausages and her vision kept doubling. The rider wasn't moving, just sitting there, watching. Lila tried to aim the empty pistol, but her arms wouldn't hold steady. The desert tilted sideways, and she grabbed the saddle horn to keep from falling, dimly aware that she was making small, desperate sounds in the back of her throat, sounds she couldn't quite control. The rider moved then, picking his way down the ridge with the careful precision of someone who knew this land. As he got closer, details emerged from the heat shimmer. A tall man on a rangy bay horse, wearing a battered hat pulled low and a duster coat despite the heat. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples. A face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the desert around them. Hard angles and weathered lines and eyes that gave nothing away. He reined up about 20 feet from Lila, and those eyes, gray, she saw now, pale as winter rain, took in everything. The trembling pistol. Juniper's heaving sides. Lila's cracked lips and desperate expression. "That loaded?" His voice was rough, like boots on gravel. Lila tried to answer, but her tongue wouldn't work properly. She managed a sound that might have been yes, might have been no, might have been please. The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "It's not." He swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it, and Lila tried to bring the pistol up again, tried to make herself dangerous, but her arms had stopped obeying entirely. "Easy now." He approached the way you'd approach a spooked animal, slow, hands visible, no sudden movements. "You're half dead from thirst. I'm not here to hurt you." "Stay back." Lila's voice came out as a croak, barely audible even to herself. He stopped, reached back to his saddle and unhooked a canteen, a larger one than Lila had owned, beaded with condensation that meant it had been kept in shade. He tossed it underhand and it landed in the sand at Juniper's feet. Lila stared at it, then at the man, then at the canteen again. "It's not poisoned," he said dryly. "If I wanted you dead, I'd just wait another hour and let the desert finish the job." The truth of that cut through Lila's delirium like a knife. She slid off Juniper, more fell than dismounted, and her knees hit the sand hard enough to send jolts of pain up her thighs. She grabbed the canteen with both hands, fumbling at the stopper with fingers that wouldn't quite grip properly. The man made a low sound and crossed the distance between them. Slow, he warned, kneeling beside her. You drink too fast, you'll just bring it back up. He helped her with the stopper, and then the canteen was at her lips, and water was flooding her mouth, cool and perfect, and the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted. She tried to gulp, but he pulled it back. I said slow. Lila wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but her body had used up everything it had. She let him control the canteen, let him give her small sips while her hands shook and tears she couldn't afford to lose leaked from the corners of her eyes. When he finally let her have a longer drink, the world started to come back into focus. Lila became aware of details again, the sweat salt smell of the man kneeling beside her, the rough calluses on his hands, the bone-handled knife sheathed at his belt, the gun on his hip, worn low and tied down the way gunslingers wore them in the dime novels. She pulled back from the canteen, swiping at her face with the back of one hand. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once, already standing, took the canteen to Juniper and poured water into his cupped palm, letting the mare drink. The tenderness of it, the way he murmured to the old horse, the patience in his movements, did something complicated to Lila's chest. "There's a water hole about 3 miles northeast," he said without looking at her. "Natural spring, good water. You can make it that far if we go slow." "We?" Lila's hand found the derringer again, though she knew now how useless it was. He did look at her then, and something that might have been amusement flickered in those winter rain eyes. "You want to make it alone? You're welcome to try, but your mare won't last another mile in this heat, and you'll be dead by sunset." He paused. "Or you can follow me to water, your choice." Lila's throat worked. Every instinct she had screamed that trusting strange men in the desert was how girls ended up dead in shallow graves. But every practical bone in her body knew he was right. She was out of options, out of water, out of everything except maybe stubbornness. "Why help me?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment, gaze drifting to the horizon. "Because I've been where you are," he said finally, "running from something you can't go back to." His eyes returned to her face. "And because leaving you here would be the same as pulling a trigger. I've got enough blood on my hands without adding yours." There was a story there, Lila thought, a heavy one, full of sharp edges and regret. She recognized the weight of it because she carried her own. "All right," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I'll follow." He nodded and moved to his horse, swinging up with that same easy grace. "Stay close. This land doesn't forgive mistakes." They rode northeast, the man setting a pace that Juniper could manage, slow enough to be safe, fast enough to get them to water before the worst heat of the day set in. Lila watched his back, the set of his shoulders, the way he scanned the landscape with the constant awareness of someone expecting trouble. "Do you have a name?" she asked after maybe a mile. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Cole Rourke." Lila tested the name in her mind, trying to remember if she'd heard it before. There was something familiar about it, something that tugged at memory, but her thoughts were still slow from dehydration. "I'm Lila," she offered. "Lila Hart." Cole glanced back at her, and something shifted in his expression, recognition maybe, or wariness. "Hart. From Red Willow?" Her stomach dropped. "You know Red Willow?" "I know enough." His jaw tightened. "Town like that? Everyone knows everyone's business, especially when someone like Briggs Mallory starts throwing money around." The name hit Lila like a fist. She must have made a sound because Cole reined up, turning his horse to face her fully. "That's what you're running from," he said. It wasn't a question. Lila lifted her chin, tried to find some scrap of dignity. "He doesn't own me." "No," Cole agreed. "But he thinks he does, and men like that don't let go of what they think belongs to them." He studied her with those unreadable eyes. "How much of a head start do you have?" "I left before dawn. He won't know I'm gone until—" She broke off, doing the math in her head. "Maybe 10 this morning. Maybe earlier if Uncle Silas wakes up sober." Cole's expression darkened. "So we've got maybe 6 hours before someone comes looking, maybe less." He looked past her, back the way they'd come, as if he could see pursuit gathering on the horizon. "And you left a trail a blind man could follow." Shame burned in Lila's cheeks. I didn't know. I've never. It's all right. Cole's voice gentled slightly. Most people don't think about covering their tracks until someone's already following them. He turned his horse back northeast. Come on. We get to the water hole. We deal with what comes next. They rode in silence after that, and Lila used the time to study her unlikely savior, Cole Rourke. The name still nagged at her, familiar in a way she couldn't place. He moved like a man comfortable with violence, every line of him suggesting coiled readiness. The gun on his hip wasn't for show. The leather of the holster was worn smooth from use, and she'd noticed how his hand drifted toward it when he scanned the horizon, unconscious habit born from necessity. A bounty hunter, maybe, or someone running from the law himself. The waterhole appeared like a miracle in the desert, a scatter of cottonwoods marking the location from a mile away, their green leaves shocking against the browns and grays of the landscape. As they got closer, Lila could see the spring itself, water bubbling up from between rocks to form a small pool before vanishing back into the sand. Grass grew in a ring around it, and the ground was trampled with hoofprints from animals and horses alike. Cole dismounted first, checking the perimeter with the systematic thoroughness of a man who'd survived by being careful. Only when he was satisfied did he nod to Lila. Safe enough for now. Let your mare drink, but not too much at once. Lila slid off Juniper and led her to the water, letting the old horse drink in careful intervals while she filled the canteen in her own empty belly. The water was cool and sweet, tasting faintly of minerals, and Lila had never experienced anything more perfect. When she looked up, Cole had unsaddled his bay and was rubbing the animal down with a piece of cloth, murmuring to it in a voice too low for Lila to make out words. The intimacy of it, the care, made her wonder what kind of man thanked his horse and worried about whether a stranger's mare had drunk too much. We'll rest here through the heat of the day, Cole said, not looking at her. Move again at dusk when it's cooler. Move where? Now he did look at her, and Lila saw something in his face that might have been pity. As far from Red Willow as we can get, because Mallory will come, Lila. Men like that always do. The certainty in his voice sent ice down her spine despite the heat. How do you know? Cole was quiet for a moment, gaze distant. Because I've known men like him. And because when someone steals something they think they own, they don't just let it go. He met her eyes. He'll come with men, probably Cyrus Granger, if Granger's still working as Mallory's tracker. You know Granger? I know of him. Cole's expression went hard. Bounty hunter. Good at what he does, which is finding people who don't want to be found. He paused. And I know he's got no morals about what happens to those people once he delivers them. Lila's hands were shaking again, and she clasped them together to hide it. So what do I do? You keep moving. You get far enough away that even Granger can't track you. Get somewhere Mallory's money doesn't reach. Cole pulled off his hat, ran a hand through sweat-damp hair. Or you go back and hope he's merciful when he's angry. That's not a choice. No, Cole agreed. It's not. They sat in the shade of the cottonwoods as the day grew hotter, and Lila tried not to think about what was coming. Tried not to imagine Mallory's thick hands on her, that wet-eyed stare claiming ownership of her body and future. Tried not to remember her uncle's casual betrayal, the way he'd looked at her like she was just another thing to be sold when the debts got too high. Why are you helping me? She asked finally. Really? Cole was leaning against a tree trunk, hat pulled low over his eyes, but Lila saw his jaw tighten. Because someone helped me once, he said. When I needed it. He shifted, and the movement made his duster fall open enough for Lila to see the gun again, the knife, the hard-used leather of his belt. And because you remind me of someone. Who? Someone who deserved better than what she got. The finality in his tone said that conversation was over, and Lila let it rest. She lay back on the sparse grass and stared up through cottonwood leaves at the sky beyond, so blue it hurt to look at. Somewhere behind them, men were saddling horses and checking weapons and preparing to hunt her down like a runaway animal. Somewhere ahead was nothing but more desert, more heat, more impossible miles. And here, in this brief moment of safety, was a stranger who'd offered water when he could have ridden past, who spoke about blood on his hands as if he knew the weight of it, who looked at Lila and saw someone worth saving. "Cole?" she said quietly. "Hmm? Thank you. For the water. For this." She gestured at the spring, the shade, the brief respite from running. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, "Don't thank me yet. We've got a long way to go, and it's going to get worse before it gets better." "How much worse?" Cole's silence was answer enough. Well, they moved out at dusk as planned, when the worst heat had broken and the desert began its slow transformation into something almost beautiful. The sky went through 100 shades of fire, orange and pink and purple bleeding into deep blue, and the air cooled enough that Lila could breathe without feeling like her lungs were being scorched. Cole set a steady pace northeast, following what he said was an old trading route that would eventually connect with the stage road. "We stay off the main paths as much as we can," he explained, "but we need to be able to resupply. You've got, what, $17? Lila nodded, surprised he'd guessed so accurately. "That'll get you maybe 3 days of food and basic supplies if you're careful. After that," he shrugged, "we'll figure it out." "We," Lila said. "You keep saying we." Cole's shoulders tensed, and for a moment she thought he'd tell her he was only escorting her to the next town, that she was on her own after that. But he just kept riding, gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "I'm heading east anyway," he said finally. "Might as well travel together. Safer that way." It was a lie, Lila thought, or at least not the whole truth, but she was in no position to question the kindness of strangers, even when that kindness came with secrets. They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses and take careful sips from the canteen. Cole taught her to watch for landmarks in the darkness, the shape of mesas against the stars, the way certain rock formations caught moonlight. "You always need to know where you are," he said, "and how to get back to water if things go wrong." "You sound like a scout." "I was, for a while. Army scout back during the Apache campaigns." His voice went flat. "Long time ago." Lila wanted to ask more. Wanted to know his whole story. All the pieces that had made him into this careful, dangerous man who saved runaway girls in the desert. But something in his posture said that door was closed. So she just nodded and tried to memorize the landscape the way he'd told her to, tried to become the kind of person who could survive out here. Dawn found them in broken country, all arroyos and scattered boulders and thin soil that supported nothing but scrub and cactus. Cole reined up on a rise and sat motionless, scanning their back trail with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" Lila asked. "Dust, maybe 2 miles back." Lila's heart kicked into a faster rhythm. "Riders?" "Can't tell yet. Could be wild horses, could be—" He broke off, jaw tight. "Could be trouble." They pushed the horses harder then, moving through the broken country at a pace that made Lila's teeth rattle and poor Juniper's breathing turn ragged. Cole kept checking behind them, and each time his expression grew grimmer. "It's riders," he said finally. "At least 3, maybe more. And they're moving fast." "Mallory? Or Granger tracking for him?" Cole's hand drifted to his gun, unconscious gesture. "Either way, we need to find cover. Somewhere we can make a stand if it comes to that." "A stand?" Lila's voice came out higher than she intended. "You mean fight?" "I mean survive." He pointed to a cluster of rock formations maybe half a mile ahead. "There. Looks like there might be an overhang, maybe even a cave. We get there, we have high ground and protection." They drove the horses hard for those rock formations, and Lila could hear Juniper's labored breathing, could feel the old mare's sides heaving. Guilt twisted in her chest. She was killing her horse, the only creature that had ever loved her freely, all because she'd been too naive to cover her tracks, too stupid to understand how the world really worked. The rocks turned out to be honeycombed with erosion, and Cole found what he was looking for, a shallow cave with a narrow entrance and enough room inside for the horses in both of them. He dismounted and led his bay inside, then came back for Juniper. "Leave the saddle on," he told Lila. "If we have to run, we need to be ready." Lila slid off Juniper and followed him into the cave, her legs trembling from exhaustion and fear. The space smelled of old stone and animal musk, and when her eyes adjusted to the dimness, She could see the ceiling was low enough that Cole had to duck. He moved to the cave mouth and drew his gun, checking the cylinder with practiced efficiency. 6 rounds. Lila watched him, watched the way his hands moved with absolute certainty, and understood with sudden clarity that Cole Rourke had done this before. Had waited in tight spaces for violent men to arrive. Had made calculations about ammunition and angles and acceptable losses. "Can you shoot?" he asked without looking at her. "I've never... The Derringer isn't even loaded. That's what I thought." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a second revolver, smaller than his but still deadly looking. "This is a .38. Not as much kick as a .45, easier to control. You know how to load it?" Lila shook her head mutely. Cole showed her, moving slowly, explaining each step. 6 rounds in the cylinder. You cock the hammer like this, pull the trigger like this. Don't aim for the head. Aim for center mass, the biggest target. And don't close your eyes when you shoot. You close your eyes, you might as well throw the damn gun at them." He pressed the weapon into her hands, and the weight of it was both terrible and comforting. Lila had never held a loaded gun before, never felt the potential for death balanced in her palms. "I don't think I can." "You can." Cole's gray eyes held hers, and the certainty in them was absolute. "If it comes down to your life or theirs, Lila, you pull that trigger. You understand me?" She nodded, though everything in her rebelled against the idea. She wasn't a killer. She was a girl who'd never hurt anyone, who'd spent her whole life trying to be small and quiet and invisible enough that violence would pass her by. But violence had found her anyway. Was riding toward her right now, probably in the form of Briggs Mallory and his hired guns. Cole returned to the cave mouth, positioning himself where he could see out but remain mostly hidden. The sun was climbing now, and in its harsh light, Lila could see the dust plume getting closer. Riders, definitely. 3 of them. No, 4. "That's Granger in front," Cole said quietly. "Big man on the roan horse. See him?" Lila edged closer to peer out. The lead rider was indeed large, barrel-chested, and heavy-shouldered, wearing a battered hat and a vest that glinted with what might have been a badge. Behind him rode 3 others, and Lila's stomach clenched when she recognized the third rider's expensive suit and fine horse. Mallory. He'd come himself. "He really wants you back," Cole observed. "Most men would have sent Granger alone, saved themselves the trouble." "He paid $600 for me." Lila's voice came out bitter. "I'm an investment." "You're a person," Cole said flatly, "and he's about to learn what happens when you try to own people." The riders were maybe 300 yards out now, and Granger had reined up, studying the ground. Even at this distance, Lila could see him pointing, gesturing to the others. He'd found their trail, was reading it like a book. Cole swore softly. "He's good. Better than I hoped." He glanced back at Lila. "When they get close, you stay behind me. You don't shoot unless I tell you to. Understood?" "What are you going to do?" "Talk first. See if we can avoid bloodshed." His smile was thin and humorless. "But I'm not optimistic." The riders approached slowly, spreading out as they came. Granger was definitely in charge, directing the others with hand signals, keeping them positioned so they couldn't all be shot from the same angle. Professional. Dangerous. When they were maybe 50 yards out, Granger called out, "You in the rocks! We just want to talk!" Cole's hand tightened on his gun, but he didn't raise it yet. "Then talk from there. You come any closer, we've got a problem." Granger reined up, studying the rock formation. Looking for angles, Lila thought. Looking for weaknesses. "We're tracking a runaway. Girl name of Lila Hart. You seen her?" "Maybe." "What's she to you?" "She's Briggs Mallory's fiancée. Took off without permission, worried her family's sick." Granger's voice was reasonable, almost friendly. "We just want to bring her home safe." Cole snorted. "That's a pretty story. You want to try again? This time without lying through your teeth?" There was a pause, and then Briggs Mallory himself rode forward, ignoring Granger's hissed warning. Up close, he was even worse than Lila remembered, jowly face red with exertion and anger, small eyes glittering with something that might have been rage or excitement, or both. "That's my property you've got in there," Mallory shouted. "I paid good money for her, and she belongs to me." "She's not property," Cole called back. "She's a person, and she says she doesn't want to marry you. I don't give a damn what she wants. I've got a bill of sale signed by her legal guardian. Bill of sale. Cole's voice went deadly quiet. You hear yourself? You're talking about a human being like she's livestock. She's what I paid for. Mallory was working himself into a rage now, face going from red to purple. You give her back right now, or by God, You'll what? Cole cut him off. You'll try to take her? You and your hired guns against these rocks? He paused. I've seen how this goes, Mallory. You rush these rocks, maybe 2 of you make it to the entrance. Maybe. And those 2 get cut down before they take 3 steps inside. Another pause, letting that sink in. Is she really worth that many dead men? Granger spoke up then, voice still reasonable. Be smart about this, friend. We've got you outnumbered. You've got nowhere to run. Just send the girl out and you can ride away. Nobody needs to die today. Nobody except Lila, you mean? Cole's laugh was harsh. What do you think happens to her once you get her back to Red Willow? You think Mallory treats her gentle after she embarrassed him like this? That's not your concern. I'm making it my concern. The standoff stretched, tension thick enough to choke on. Lila crouched behind Cole, the pistol heavy in her hands, and tried to keep her breathing steady. 4 men against 2. 4 men with guns and experience in the law, such as it was, on their side. Then Granger shifted his weight, and Lila saw Cole's body tense in response. Last chance, Granger called. Send her out, or we come in shooting. Come ahead, then. Cole's voice was almost gentle. But you better be ready to die for another man's pride. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Granger made a gesture, and the 4 men began to spread out wider, looking for angles on the cave entrance. Cole tracked them with his gun, making minute adjustments to his position. When I start shooting, he said quietly to Lila, you get deep in this cave. There's a crack in the back wall. You see it? Looks like it might go through to the other side. I'm not leaving you to... You are, if I tell you to. His tone allowed no argument. I can hold them here for a while, buy you time to run. You get through that crack, you get on Juniper, and you ride northeast until you hit the stage road. You flag down the first stage you see. You get as far from here as that $17 will take you. Cole, that's not a request, Lila. That's me trying to keep you alive. Before she could answer, gunfire erupted. One of Mallory's men had circled around to the east, thinking he had an angle, and Cole's first shot took him in the shoulder and spun him out of his saddle. The other 3 scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and scrub. Now, Cole barked. Go! But Lila couldn't move. Couldn't make her legs work, couldn't abandon this stranger who'd given her water and taught her to shoot and was now maybe dying to buy her freedom. Another shot, this one from Granger, and rock chips exploded near Cole's head. He returned fire, once, twice, driving the bounty hunter back behind cover. Then he glanced over his shoulder at Lila. I said go! I can't. There has to be another way. There isn't! His face was hard, but his eyes, those winter rain eyes, held something that might have been fear. Not for himself. For her. Don't make this for nothing, Lila. Don't let them win just because you're scared to run. More gunfire. Mallory himself was shooting now, wild shots that showed more anger than accuracy, but dangerous nonetheless. One bullet whined through the cave entrance and ricocheted off the back wall, and Lila ducked reflexively. When she looked up again, Cole was bleeding from a graze across his temple, blood running down the side of his face. He wiped it away impatiently and kept shooting, measured and careful, making every round count. Lila looked at the crack in the cave wall, looked at Cole's back, at the blood in his hair, at the impossible odds, looked at the pistol in her hands, and made a choice. She moved deeper into the cave, and she saw Cole's shoulders relax fractionally, saw him think she was following orders, seeking escape. But instead of the crack in the wall, Lila positioned herself behind a tumble of rocks, where she could see the cave entrance from a different angle, where she could cover Cole's blind side. If he noticed, he didn't say anything, just kept firing, kept defending, kept buying her the freedom she'd already decided she wasn't taking without him. Outside, Granger was directing the others, trying to coordinate a rush on the cave. They had the numbers. They had the advantage. All they needed was enough courage to face Cole Rourke's gun, and eventually they'd wear him down. Eventually was the word that mattered. Because eventually Cole would run out of ammunition. Eventually his luck would fail. Eventually they'd get him, and then they'd get Lila, and all of this, all the hope and defiance and desperate courage, would collapse into nothing. Unless Lila could change the equation. She watched Mallory circle around to the south, saw him dismount and use his horse for cover as he worked closer to the cave. Saw the gleam of his pistol in the harsh sunlight. Saw him aim toward Cole's position. Lila raised the .38 with trembling hands, cocked the hammer the way Cole had shown her. Aimed. Not for Mallory's head, not for anything fancy, just for center mass the way Cole had said. The biggest target, don't close your eyes. She didn't. The pistol bucked in her hands, the report deafening in the confined space, and Mallory screamed. Not a death scream. Lila had missed anything vital, but a scream of pain and shock and outrage that a woman, that his property, had dared to shoot him. He went down clutching his leg, and chaos erupted. Cole took advantage of the distraction to put a round into the wounded man from earlier who'd been trying to crawl back into the fight. Granger and the fourth man returned fire blindly, wasting ammunition, their careful coordination shattered. "I told you to run!" Cole shouted over the gunfire, but there was something in his voice that wasn't quite anger, something that might have been pride. "I'm done running!" Lila shouted back and fired again, this time at Granger's position. Missed, but it made the bounty hunter duck, bought Cole time to reload. The fight became chaotic after that, noise and smoke and fear. Lila stopped thinking, just acted on instinct and adrenaline, fired when she saw targets, ducked when bullets came too close, kept herself between Cole and anyone trying to flank him. She didn't know how long it lasted. Minutes, maybe. Hours, possibly. Time stopped meaning anything beyond heartbeats and trigger pulls and the desperate will to survive. Then abruptly, it was over. The remaining men were falling back, Granger half carrying Mallory, the fourth man already mounted and riding hard to the east. The wounded man they left behind, groaning in the dust. Cole watched them go, gun still raised, not trusting it. Only when they'd vanished into the shimmer of heat and distance did he lower his weapon. "They'll be back," he said finally. Soon as they regroup, soon as Mallory gets patched up and remembers how angry he is. Then we need to move. Lila's hands were shaking so hard she could barely holster the pistol, but her voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. Cole turned to look at her fully, and his expression was complicated. Anger and respect and something else she couldn't name. "I told you to run." "I know." "You could have been killed." "So could you." They stared at each other for a long moment, and then Cole's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "You're either very brave or very foolish. Can I be both?" This time he did smile, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. "Yeah, I suppose you can." They left the wounded man with a canteen and his horse, which was more mercy than he'd shown them. Cole checked him for weapons, found a knife and a second pistol, and tossed both into the scrub where they'd take hours to find. "Tell Mallory he's done," Cole said, kneeling beside the man. "Tell him if he comes after her again, I won't just wound him. You understand?" The man nodded, pale and sweating, clutching his shoulder where Cole's bullet had torn through muscle. "You're a dead man, Rourke. Mallory's got friends. He's got money. He'll put a price on your head so high every bounty hunter from here to California will be looking for you." "Let them look." Cole stood already turning away. "I've been hunted before." They rode hard for the first hour, pushing the horses despite their exhaustion, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ambush site. Lila kept expecting to hear pursuit behind them, kept glancing over her shoulder at empty horizon, but the desert remained silent except for the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd killed a man. No, wounded him, she corrected herself, though the distinction felt thin. She'd pointed a gun at another human being and pulled the trigger, had watched him fall, screaming. The memory of it sat in her stomach like spoiled meat. Cole must have noticed something in her face because he finally slowed his bay to a walk and dropped back beside Juniper. "You all right?" "I shot someone." Lila's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I actually shot him." "You defended yourself. There's a difference." "Is there?" She looked at him, searching those gray eyes for absolution or condemnation. She wasn't sure which. "He was going to kill you. Kill us both. But I can still feel the gun kicking, still hear him screaming." Cole was quiet for a long moment, gaze fixed on the horizon. When he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way she hadn't heard before. First time's always the hardest. You think it'll get easier, but it doesn't. Just gets different. He paused. But that feeling you have right now, that sick weight in your gut, hold on to that. The day you stop feeling it is the day you've lost something important. What did you lose? His jaw tightened, more than I can afford to talk about. They rode in silence after that, through country that grew gradually less barren as they moved northeast. Scattered juniper appeared, then piñon pine, and the air began to smell of something besides dust and sage. Cole navigated by landmarks Lila couldn't identify, a particular rock formation, the angle of a mesa, the shape of clouds gathering over distant mountains. Where are we going? She asked finally. There's a trading post about 20 miles from here, run by a man named Jacob Tinsdale, half Navajo, half Irish, all business. He doesn't ask questions, and he doesn't volunteer information to anyone wearing a badge or carrying too much money. Cole glanced at her. We can resupply there. Get you some proper traveling clothes, maybe a hat that doesn't make you look like you're going to Sunday services. Lila looked down at her dress, already torn and filthy from days in the desert, the fabric never meant for hard travel. I didn't exactly plan my wardrobe for running away. No, Cole agreed. You just grabbed what you could and ran. That took guts. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. The sun was starting its afternoon descent when Cole reined up suddenly, head cocked like a dog, hearing something beyond human range. Lila stopped beside him, heart already accelerating. What is it? Not sure. He scanned the landscape, eyes narrowed. Thought I heard, there. Lila followed his gaze and saw them. 3 riders coming fast from the southeast, pushing their horses hard. Even at this distance, she could see the glint of metal, badges or guns, she couldn't tell which. Not Mallory's men, Cole said. Moving wrong. Too organized. His hand drifted to his gun. Could be law. Could be bounty hunters who've already heard there's money on you. On me? But we just... Mallory couldn't have... Mallory's got money and telegraph access. He could have wired ahead to every town within 50 miles, claimed you stole from him, said you're dangerous. Cole's voice was grim. Men like him know how to make the law work in their favor. The riders were closing fast, and Lila could see now they were definitely armed, definitely purposeful in their approach. Cole made a decision, spurring his bay toward a cluster of boulders 30 yards west. We can't keep running, Lila protested even as she followed him. We can't fight everyone. We're not going to. Cole dismounted behind the boulders, checking his ammunition with quick efficiency. But we're not going to just surrender either. Not until we know what they want. The riders slowed as they approached, spreading out in a practiced formation that said military or professional lawmen. The lead rider, a lean man with a marshal's star pinned to his vest, raised one hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or warning. Hold there, he called. Marshal Tom Wardell, New Mexico Territory, need to ask you folks some questions. Cole didn't raise his gun, but he didn't step out from cover either. Ask from there, Marshal. We've had a long day and we're not feeling particularly trusting. Wardell reined up about 30 feet away, his deputies flanking him. He was older than Lila had first thought, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of those years outdoors. His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Got a wire from Red Willow this morning, Wardell said. Briggs Mallory claims his fiancée was kidnapped by a drifter named of Cole Rourke. That you, Rourke? Depends on your definition of kidnapped. Either you took her against her will or you didn't. I gave her water when she was dying of thirst and showed her where to find more, Cole said flatly. If that's kidnapping, then yes, I'm guilty. Wardell's gaze shifted to Lila, and she forced herself to step out where he could see her clearly. The marshal took in her torn dress, her sunburned face, the pistol on her hip that she'd forgotten she was still wearing. Miss Hart, is it? Wardell's voice gentled slightly. You all right? This man hurt you in any way? No. Lila's voice came out stronger than she expected. He saved my life. Multiple times. Mallory says you're his intended bride. Says you ran off before the wedding. Mallory paid my uncle $600 for me like I was livestock. The words came out harsh, edged with all the fury and fear of the past days. I'm not his bride. I'm not his property. I'm a person who refused to be sold. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably, and Wardell's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy, but his voice remained professional. That's a serious accusation, miss. You got any proof of this transaction? My uncle's gambling debts and Mallory's bank records, Lila said, though I doubt either of them kept receipts for buying a human being. Wardell was quiet for a moment, studying her face. You know what Mallory's saying happened to him this morning? Says you and Rourke ambushed his party, shot 3 men, left 1 for dead in the desert. That's a lie. Lila's hands clenched into fists. They tracked us down, tried to force me back at gunpoint. We defended ourselves. That true, Rourke? Cole had moved slightly, positioning himself where he could see all 3 lawmen. Every word. Mallory brought Cyrus Granger and 3 hired guns. They gave us a choice, surrender or die. We chose option 3. Which was? Not dying. Wardell's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. Heard about you, Rourke, Army scout during the Apache campaigns. Worked as a range detective for a while. Some say you killed a man in Colorado. Others say you saved a town from claim jumpers. Stories don't exactly agree on much except that you're dangerous. Stories rarely do. You carrying any warrants I should know about? Cole was silent for a beat too long, and Lila's stomach dropped. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. Nothing active in New Mexico territory. That's not the same as nothing. No, Cole agreed. It's not. Wardell sighed, the sound of a man dealing with complications he didn't have time for. Here's what I see. A girl who looks like she's been through the ringer, claiming she was sold like cattle. A drifter with a questionable past who claims he was just helping. And a wealthy man with connections saying he's been wronged. He paused. Legally, I could bring both of you in. Let a judge sort it out. And while we're sitting in a jail cell, Cole said quietly, Mallory's money and influence will be working overtime to make sure that judge sees things his way. That about right? Wardell didn't answer, which was answer enough. Lila stepped forward, ignoring Cole's warning hiss. Marshal, I know how this looks. I know Mallory has money and respectability, and I'm just a girl with nothing. But I'm asking you, as a person, not as a lawman, don't send me back to him. Don't make me marry a man who sees me as property. Something shifted in Wardell's expression. My daughter's about your age, he said quietly. And if someone tried to buy her... He trailed off, jaw tight. Then he looked at his deputies. Boys, I think we must have missed these folks. Easy to do in country this big. The younger deputy, barely 20, Lila thought, looked confused. But Marshal, we're looking right at... I said we missed them, Turner. Wardell's voice held authority that allowed no argument. We'll head back to Red Willow. Tell Mallory we searched the area and found no sign of his missing fiancée or her alleged kidnapper. Can't chase ghosts now, can we? Understanding dawned on Turner's face, and he nodded slowly. The other deputy, older, scarred, just smiled grimly. No ghosts here, Marshal, just empty desert. Wardell turned his horse, then paused. Rourke, you get that girl somewhere safe, somewhere Mallory's reach doesn't extend. And Miss Hart? He met her eyes. You find yourself a life worth living, one you choose for yourself. Thank you, Lila whispered, and meant it with everything she had. Don't thank me yet. Mallory's not going to let this go, and I can only look the other way once. Wardell tipped his hat. You've got maybe a day's head start before he sends someone else. I'd suggest you make it count. The 3 lawmen rode south, back toward Red Willow, and Lila watched them go with a mixture of relief and renewed fear. One decent man's mercy had bought them time, but time was all it was. Mallory would keep coming. Men like that always did. We need to move, Cole said, already mounting up. Tinsdale's trading post is our best bet. We can get supplies, maybe find out if Mallory's spread word any farther. They rode in silence for a while, the near encounter with the law still sitting heavy between them. Finally, Lila worked up the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her since Wardell mentioned Colorado. What happened in Colorado? Cole's shoulders tensed. Nothing you need to worry about. We're traveling together. She paused, trying to find words for what they'd become. We're trusting each other with our lives. Don't I deserve to know if you're wanted for murder? I'm not wanted for murder. His voice was flat, emotionless. Not anymore. The man I killed deserved it, and the town agreed. They just didn't appreciate the method. What method? Cole was quiet so long Lila thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his words came slow and careful, like each one hurt to speak. His name was Clayton Morse. He owned the biggest ranch in the county, which meant he owned the sheriff and the judge and most of the respectable citizens, and he liked to visit the brothel on the edge of town, where the women didn't have the protection of respectable employment. Lila's stomach tightened. She knew this story, or ones like it, knew where it was heading. There was a girl there, Cole continued, Sarah. She was 16, sold into the work by her stepfather when she was 14. Morse took a particular interest in her, decided she belonged to him exclusively, which meant beatings when she looked at other customers, worse when she tried to refuse him. He paused, voice going hollow. She asked me for help. I was working as a range detective, investigating rustling in the area. She showed me the bruises, the burns, asked me to make it stop. What did you do? I went to the sheriff first. Proper channels, like a law-abiding citizen. He laughed in my face, said if a whore got rough treatment, that was the cost of her profession. Cole's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. So I went to Morse directly, told him to leave Sarah alone or face consequences. And? He beat her so badly she couldn't walk for a week, sent me a message. She was his property, and I could mind my own business or join her in the dirt. Lila closed her eyes, already knowing how this ended. You killed him? I challenged him to a fair fight, drew on him in the street in front of witnesses. He went for his gun first, and I shot him dead. Cole's voice was completely flat now, drained of all emotion. Problem was, nobody wanted to testify that Morse drew first. Nobody wanted to cross a dead man's powerful friends. So the story became that I murdered him in cold blood over a whore, and suddenly I had a price on my head. But you said you're not wanted anymore. I'm not. 6 months later, one of Morse's hired hands grew a conscience and testified that I'd fought fair. The warrant was dropped, and I was free to go. His laugh was bitter. Except I wasn't, really. Sarah was dead by then, drank herself into the grave, couldn't live with what had been done to her. And I was free, but what good was freedom when I'd failed the one person who'd trusted me to protect her? The words hung in the air between them, and Lila understood suddenly why Cole had helped her, why he'd risked his life for a stranger in the desert. He was trying to save Sarah again, trying to rewrite an ending that had already been written in blood and regret. I'm not her, Lila said quietly. Cole's head snapped around, and his eyes were raw with something that might have been pain. I know that. Do you? Because it seems like you're seeing ghosts when you look at me, fighting battles that are already over. Maybe I am. He looked away, jaw tight. But that doesn't change what Mallory is. Doesn't change what he'll do to you if he gets you back. No, Lila agreed. It doesn't. But I'm not asking you to save me, Cole. I'm asking you to help me save myself. There's a difference. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. When did you get so wise? About the time I shot a man to keep him from killing you. That surprised a laugh out of him, short and sharp, but genuine. Fair enough. The trading post appeared just before sunset, exactly where Cole said it would be. A low adobe building with a corral out back and smoke rising from a chimney that suggested someone was cooking. A hand-painted sign proclaimed it Tinsdale's Trading Post and Provisions, in letters that had been weathered by years of desert wind and sun. Cole dismounted cautiously, scanning the area before gesturing for Lila to follow. Stay close. Tinsdale's trustworthy, but you never know who else might be here. The interior was dim and cluttered, shelves packed with everything from canned goods to ammunition to bolts of cloth. The air smelled of tobacco smoke and leather and something cooking that made Lila's stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten anything but jerky and water in 2 days. A man emerged from the back room, Jacob Tinsdale, presumably. He was exactly as Cole had described. Mixed heritage visible in his features, dark eyes that assessed them both in a single glance, hands scarred from years of hard work. He looked at Cole, and recognition flickered across his face. Rourke. Been a while. Jacob. Cole nodded. We need supplies. And discretion. Tinsdale's gaze shifted to Lila, taking in her disheveled appearance, the gun on her hip, the way she stayed close to Cole. Discretion costs extra. I've got money. I'm sure you do. Question is, whose money is it? Mine, Lila said, stepping forward. Earned through 6 years of sewing and washing and any other work I could find in Red Willow. Nobody's buying my silence, Mr. Tinsdale. We're just trying to stay alive. Something that might have been approval crossed Tinsdale's face. Red Willow? You wouldn't happen to be the girl Briggs Mallory's looking for, would you? Lila's hand drifted toward her pistol, and Tinsdale raised both hands in a placating gesture. Easy. I'm not interested in Mallory's bounty. Man's been trying to cheat me on trades for years. I owe him less than nothing. He moved to the counter, pulling out a ledger. But I should tell you, you're not the only ones asking questions. Had 2 men through here this morning, showing a sketch of a girl matching your description. Said she was dangerous, armed, traveling with a known criminal. Let me guess, Cole said. They offered money for information. $50 if I saw you. Double that if I could hold you here until they arrived. Tinsdale smiled without humor. I told them I hadn't seen anyone matching that description and wished them luck with their search. Why? Lila asked. You don't know us. I know enough. Tinsdale closed the ledger. I know Mallory's type, rich man who thinks money can buy anything, including people. And I know Rourke here has a reputation for helping folks who need it, even when it costs him. He looked at Cole. You saved my nephew from a range war down in Lincoln County. Kid would have gotten himself killed if you hadn't talked sense into him. Figure I owe you one. You don't owe me anything, Jacob. Maybe not, but I'm helping anyway. Tinsdale pulled out a piece of paper, sketching quickly. You need to get out of the territory. Mallory's got too much reach here, too many friends in law enforcement. But if you head north into Colorado, there's a mining town called Silver Falls. Growing fast, lots of strangers, nobody asks too many questions. My cousin runs a boarding house there. You mention my name, she'll give you a fair price and keep her mouth shut about who's staying under her roof. He finished the sketch, a rough map showing trails and landmarks, and slid it across the counter. It's a hard ride, maybe 5 days if you don't run into trouble, but it's your best chance. Cole studied the map, then nodded slowly. Colorado. I know where you had trouble before, Tinsdale said quietly. But that was eastern Colorado, and this is western. Different counties, different law. You should be safe enough. Should be. Cole's smile was thin. Famous last words. They spent the next hour outfitting properly. Tinsdale provided 2 sets of men's clothing for Lila, canvas pants, cotton shirts, a duster coat, and a hat that would hide her hair and help her pass for a young man from a distance. Ammunition for both pistols, jerky and hardtack, and coffee. A proper bedroll and blanket. Medical supplies in case the wound on Cole's temple needed attention. When Lila protested the cost, Tinsdale waved her off. Call it an investment in justice. Besides, you're paying fair price for the goods. The information and the discretion are free. As the sun set, they ate Tinsdale's cooking, stew made from rabbit and vegetables, the best thing Lila had tasted in memory. The trading post had 2 rooms in the back, and Tinsdale offered them both for the night. You'll want to rest, he said. And your horses are about done in. Let them recover, get a fresh start tomorrow before dawn. Cole looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to keep moving, but exhaustion won out. All right, but if anyone comes looking, I'll wake you first. Give you time to slip out the back. Tinsdale poured coffee, strong and bitter. Those men who were here this morning, they're heading southeast following a false trail I might have mentioned. You've got at least a day before they realize they've been sent in the wrong direction. After dinner, Lila changed into the men's clothing Tinsdale had provided, marveling at the freedom of movement pants allowed compared to skirts. She braided her hair tightly and tucked it under the hat, checking her reflection in a cracked mirror. A stranger looked back at her. Sunburned, hard-eyed, wearing a gun like she knew how to use it. Not the girl who'd crept out of Red Willow 3 days ago. Someone different, someone stronger. She found Cole in the stable, checking Juniper's hooves with careful attention. He looked up when she entered, and something shifted in his expression. "Look at you," he said. "Proper outlaw." "Is that what I am now?" "You shot a man to defend yourself and ran from a forced marriage. In some folks' eyes, that makes you an outlaw." He straightened, studying her. "In mine, it makes you someone who refused to accept being a victim." Lila moved to Juniper's side, running her hand down the mare's neck. "She's limping. Left front, slight, not serious, but she needs rest." Cole's voice was gentle. "She's old, Lila, and she's been working hard. 5 days to Colorado might be too much for her." "I'm not leaving her. I'm not suggesting you do, but we might need to take it slower or find her a place to stay until she's stronger." The thought of leaving Juniper behind made Lila's chest tight. The old mare was her last connection to her mother, to a time when the world had held more kindness than cruelty. But pushing her to death in the desert would be its own kind of cruelty. "We'll see how she does tomorrow," Lila said finally. "Maybe the rest will help." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the horses breathe and shift, to the distant sound of wind outside. Finally, Cole spoke. "You did good today. In the fight, with the marshal, all of it. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs doing despite the fear." He paused. "Sarah was terrified too, but she didn't have the strength to fight back. You do." Lila turned to face him fully. "I told you before, I'm not her, and you're not responsible for saving me the way you couldn't save her." "I know." But his voice said he didn't. "Not really. Doesn't change the fact that I'm going to do everything I can to get you somewhere safe." "And then what? You ride off into the sunset, find the next person who needs saving?" Cole's expression shuddered. "Something like that." "What if I don't want you to leave?" The words hung between them, too honest and too raw, and Lila immediately wished she could take them back. But Cole just looked at her with those winter rain eyes, and the loneliness in them was so vast it made her ache. "You don't know what you're saying," he said quietly. "You've known me for 3 days. 3 days of running and fighting and surviving. That's not enough to what? To trust you? To be grateful you saved my life? To want you to stay?" Lila stepped closer. "You're right. I don't know your whole story, but I know you gave me water when you could have ridden past. I know you fought for me when you could have left me to Mallory. I know you're trying to protect me even when it costs you something. That's enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to not want to say goodbye when we reach Colorado." Cole was quiet for a long moment, and Lila could see the war happening behind his eyes. Want and fear and old wounds that hadn't healed battling for dominance. Finally, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid back under her hat, the gesture oddly tender. "Get some rest," he said, voice rough. "We've got a long road ahead." It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't a rejection either. Lila would take it. She slept that night in one of Tinsdale's back rooms, on a real bed for the first time in days, and dreamed of open roads and a gray-eyed man who looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth fighting for, like she was something more than property or burden or mistake. When she woke before dawn, she could hear Cole and Tinsdale talking in low voices outside. She dressed quickly in her new clothes, braided her hair, and emerged to find them bent over the map. "The northern route's longer but safer," Tinsdale was saying. "Keeps you away from the main roads where Mallory's likely to have men watching." "How much longer?" "Maybe a day. Day and a half if the weather turns." Cole noticed Lila and straightened. "Morning. Coffee's hot." She poured herself a cup, savoring the bitter warmth. "When do we leave?" "Soon as the horses are saddled." He folded the map and tucked it into his coat. "Jacob's given us a route that should keep us clear of trouble, but we'll need to move carefully." They said their goodbyes to Tinsdale as the sun painted the eastern sky, pink and gold. The trader pressed a small pouch into Lila's hands, extra ammunition, and a spare knife. "For luck," he said, "and because every person should have the means to defend themselves." "Thank you," Lila said, "for everything." Just make something good out of this new life you're building. That'll be thanks enough. They rode north as the desert woke around them, and with each mile, Lila felt Red Willow and Briggs Mallory receding further into the past. Not gone. They'd never be truly gone. Not while Mallory had money and pride driving him, but distant enough that she could breathe without feeling the weight of pursuit. Juniper moved better after the night's rest, her limp barely noticeable, and Lila allowed herself a small measure of hope. Maybe they could make it to Colorado. Maybe they could find that mining town where strangers were common and questions were rare. Maybe she could build the life Tinsdale had wished for her, one chosen freely, one that belonged to her alone. The land changed as they traveled, becoming greener as they gained elevation, pinon and juniper giving way to ponderosa pine. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of distant snow from mountains Lila couldn't yet see. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. All this vast, wild country that didn't care about human dramas, that simply existed in its own fierce perfection. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat jerky under the shade of a massive pine. Cole studied the map, comparing it to the landscape around them. "We're making good time," he said. "If we keep this pace, we'll hit the Colorado border by tomorrow night. And then? And then we're in different territory, different jurisdiction. Mallory's reach doesn't extend as far there." He refolded the map. "Doesn't mean we're safe, but it means the odds shift in our favor." Lila leaned back against the tree trunk, closing her eyes and letting the dappled sunlight warm her face. "Tell me about Silver Falls. What's it like?" "I've never been there, but Tinsdale says it's a mining town. Silver Strike about 2 years ago brought in people from all over. Some looking to get rich, some just looking to disappear into the crowd." Cole's voice was thoughtful. "Places like that don't ask too many questions. You can be whoever you say you are, as long as you work hard and don't cause trouble." "And what will I say I am?" "Whatever you want. That's the point of starting over." Lila opened her eyes, looking at him. "What about you? What will you be in Silver Falls?" Cole was quiet for a beat too long. "I'm not staying, Lila." "Why not?" "Because I'm not good at staying, because every place I settle, eventually trouble finds me. Because—" He broke off, jaw tight. "Because you deserve better than a drifter with a past that won't let him go." "Shouldn't I get to decide what I deserve?" "Not about this." His voice had gone hard, defensive. "I get you to safety, I make sure you're set up proper, and then I move on. That's the deal." "I don't remember making a deal." "Well, that's the way it is anyway." They stared at each other, tension crackling between them, and Lila wanted to push, wanted to demand he stop running from whatever demons chased him. But she could see the fear beneath his stubbornness, could see how much it cost him to even consider the possibility of something different. So she let it rest. For now. They rode through the afternoon and into evening, making camp as darkness fell in a small clearing surrounded by pines. Cole built a fire while Lila tended the horses, and they ate dinner in comfortable silence, watching sparks rise towards stars that blazed like scattered diamonds overhead. "My mother used to tell me stories about the stars," Lila said quietly. She said every constellation was a person who'd loved so deeply they'd been written into the sky, so their story would never be forgotten. "That's a nice thought. I used to wonder what my story would be, if anyone would remember me when I was gone." She poked at the fire with a stick, sending up fresh sparks. "Now I'm just hoping I live long enough to have a story worth remembering." "You will." Cole's certainty surprised her. "You're stronger than you know, Lila Hart." "I shot a man and ran away from home. That's not strength, that's desperation." Strength and desperation aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you're desperate and fight anyway. He was quiet for a moment. "Sarah never fought. She just endured. Until she couldn't anymore. But you? You fight." "Because you taught me how." "No, I just showed you what you already had in you." Cole met her eyes across the fire. "The courage was always yours. I just gave you permission to use it." Lila felt something shift in her chest, warm and terrifying and impossibly fragile. She wanted to cross the small distance between them, wanted to prove that courage could be used for more than just survival. But Cole's expression had already shuttered again, walls back in place, and she knew pushing now would only drive him further away. So she simply said, "Thank you," and meant it for more than he would ever let himself believe. They took turns keeping watch that night, Cole insisting, despite Lila's protests, that she could manage. When her shift came, she sat by the dying fire and listened to the night sounds. Wind in the pines, the distant call of an owl, Cole's steady breathing from his bedroll. The gun on her hip felt heavy and strange, but also right, like armor she'd earned through blood and choice. Tomorrow they'd cross into Colorado. Tomorrow they'd be one day closer to Silver Falls and whatever new life waited there. Tomorrow was full of possibility and danger in equal measure. But tonight, in this small circle of firelight, Lila let herself feel safe. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was going to survive this. And more than survive, maybe she was going to build something worth having, something that belonged to her alone, chosen freely, paid for with her own courage. The future was uncertain. Mallory was still out there, still hunting. Cole was already planning his departure. The world was full of dangers she barely understood, but Lila Hart was still breathing, still fighting, still free. And for tonight, that was enough. The Colorado border was nothing but a marker stone half buried in scrub grass, weathered smooth by wind and time. Lila reined Juniper to a stop beside it, running her fingers over the carved letters that spelled out 2 territories, 2 jurisdictions, 2 different versions of what the law meant. "This is it?" she asked. Cole had already ridden past, scanning the horizon with that constant wariness that never seemed to leave him. "It's a line on a map. Doesn't mean much to men like Mallory, but it means everything to the law." He glanced back at her. "From here on, any warrants he's sworn out in New Mexico don't hold weight. He wants you back, he'll have to start over with Colorado authorities." "Will he?" "Probably. But it takes time, and time is what we're buying." Cole's expression was grim. "Question is whether we've bought enough." They pushed north through country that grew steadily more rugged, the flat desert giving way to foothills and then to mountains proper. Pine forests closed in around them, and the air turned crisp enough that Lila could see her breath in the mornings. The change was disorienting after days of brutal heat. She'd gone from dying of thirst to shivering in her blanket, from vast open sky to trees so thick they blocked out the sun. On the second day in Colorado, they encountered their first real obstacle. The trail Tinsdale had marked on his map led through a narrow canyon, walls rising steep on both sides, the path just wide enough for horses to pass single file. Cole stopped at the entrance, studying the terrain with obvious unease. "I don't like it," he said. "Perfect place for an ambush. One man with a rifle at the top could pin us down, pick us off at leisure. Is there another way around?" "Not without adding 2 days to our journey." Cole dismounted, examining the ground. "And Juniper's favoring that front leg again. 2 extra days might be more than she can handle." Lila's stomach clenched. She'd been trying not to notice how the old mare's limp had gradually worsened, how her breathing had grown more labored with each climb. Juniper had given everything she had and more, carrying Lila toward freedom even as her own strength failed. "What do we do?" Lila asked quietly. Cole was silent for a long moment, weighing options against each other. "We take the risk. Move through fast. Stay alert. If there's trouble—" He looked at her. "If there's trouble, you don't stop. You put your heels to Juniper and you ride like hell for the other side. Understood?" "I'm not leaving you again." "Lila, I said I'm not leaving you." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "We go through together or we find another way. Those are the options." Something that might have been exasperation crossed Cole's face, but also something warmer. Pride, maybe. Or resignation to the fact that she was just as stubborn as he was. "All right, together. But you stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you at least consider it." "I'll consider it," Lila agreed, knowing full well she wouldn't. They entered the canyon at a steady walk, Cole's hand never far from his gun, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgeline above. The walls seemed to press in on both sides, and the sound of the horses' hooves echoed strangely off the stone. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs, every shadow suddenly threatening, every bird call potentially a signal. They were halfway through when the shooting started, not from above, as Cole had feared, but from behind. 3 riders bursting out of cover where the canyon bent, guns already firing. Cole reacted instantly, wheeling his bay and returning fire while shouting at Lila to move. She drove her heels into Juniper's sides, and the old mare lunged forward despite her exhaustion, despite the pain in her leg, driven by the same survival instinct that had kept them both alive this long. Bullets whined off the canyon walls, and Lila bent low over Juniper's neck, making herself as small a target as possible. She could hear Cole behind her, the distinctive crack of his pistol firing in controlled rhythm, each shot deliberate and measured. Then his voice, urgent. "Cave on the right, 20 yards. Get to it." Lila saw the opening he meant, barely wide enough for a horse, cut into the canyon wall like a wound. She aimed Juniper for it and prayed the mare had one more burst of speed left in her. Behind them, the shooting intensified, and she heard a man scream, then the heavy thud of a body hitting ground. Juniper reached the cave entrance and shouldered through, stumbling in the darkness beyond. Lila barely managed to keep her seat, grabbing for the saddle horn as her eyes struggled to adjust. The cave was larger than it looked from outside, opening into a space maybe 30 feet across with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow. And at the back, barely visible in the dim light filtering through the entrance, another opening, a way through. Cole burst in behind her, his bay wild-eyed and heaving. Blood streaked the horse's shoulder, but Cole seemed unhurt. He dismounted in one fluid motion, already moving to position himself at the entrance. "How many?" Lila asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "3. I got one, maybe wounded another, but they're not Mallory's men." "How do you know?" "Because they're not trying to take you alive." Cole's voice was grim. "Those were kill shots. Someone wants you dead, not captured." The implications of that settled over Lila like a shroud. Mallory wanted her back, wanted to punish her for the humiliation of running, but he wanted her alive. These men had different orders. These men were here to eliminate a problem permanently. "Mallory must have decided I'm more trouble than I'm worth," Lila said quietly. "Or he figured if he can't have you, nobody can." Cole checked his ammunition. 4 rounds left in his pistol, maybe a dozen in his belt. "Either way, we need to get out of here. That opening at the back, can you see where it goes?" Lila dismounted and moved deeper into the cave, running her hand along the wall for guidance. The rear opening was narrow, but passable, and beyond it she could hear something that made her heart lift. Running water. "There's a stream back here. I can hear it." "A stream means a valley, means a way out." Cole glanced back at the entrance, where shadows were moving in the harsh sunlight beyond. "We go now, before they work up the courage to come in after us." They led the horses through the narrow passage, Juniper balking at the darkness until Lila murmured reassurances and coaxed her forward step by careful step. The passage twisted and descended, walls pressing so close in places that Lila had to turn sideways, and she could hear her own breathing loud in the confined space, could feel the weight of stone above her like a physical pressure. Then they emerged into light and open air, and Lila gasped at what lay before them. A hidden valley, green and lush, carved into the mountain like a secret. The stream they'd heard tumbled down the far wall in a waterfall, feeding a pool that overflowed into a creek winding through meadow grass. Aspen trees clustered along the banks, their leaves already touched with gold, and the air smelled of water and growing things and possibilities. "Well," Cole said softly, "Tinsdale didn't mention this on his map." They moved quickly to put distance between themselves and the cave entrance, not knowing if their pursuers would find the passage or give up and circle around. Cole found a spot where the aspens grew thick enough to hide the horses and where they had a clear view of both the cave exit and the valley floor. Only then did Lila notice how badly Juniper was trembling. "Easy, girl," she murmured, running her hands over the mare's legs, checking for injuries. No blood, no obvious wounds, but Juniper's breathing came in harsh gasps and her eyes showed too much white. The burst of speed through the canyon had cost her everything she had left. Cole crouched beside Lila, his expression grave. Her legs blown, not broken, but the tendons strained badly, maybe torn. Can she heal? With rest, maybe. Weeks of it at least. But he didn't finish, didn't need to. But they didn't have weeks. They had maybe hours before those men found them, or more riders arrived. Lila pressed her forehead against Juniper's neck, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and dust and the years they'd survived together. "I can't leave her." "I know." Cole's voice was gentle. But she can't make it to Silver Falls, Lila. Not like this. And if we stay here, we're sitting targets. So what do I do? Shoot her? The words came out choked, and Lila hated the way her voice broke. Put her down like she's nothing but a used-up thing? She's not nothing. She carried you out of hell and halfway to freedom. She's... Cole paused, choosing his words carefully. She's a hero, Lila. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a hero is let them rest. Lila knew he was right. Knew that asking Juniper to carry her any farther would be cruelty, would be using her the same way Mallory had tried to use Lila, as a thing, as property, as something to be consumed and discarded. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. I'll do it, Cole said quietly. If you want. You don't have to. No. Lila straightened, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. She's mine. My responsibility. I should be the one. Cole handed her his pistol without a word, and Lila took it with shaking hands. Juniper stood patient and trusting, head low, too exhausted to fear what was coming. Lila stroked the mare's face one last time, memorizing the soft gray muzzle, the dark eyes that had watched her grow from girl to woman. Thank you, Lila whispered, for everything, for loving me when nobody else did, for carrying me when I couldn't walk on my own, for being the best thing in my whole worthless life. She raised the pistol, pressed it to the spot Cole indicated. Quick, he'd said, painless, and pulled the trigger. The sound echoed across the valley, and Juniper dropped without a sound, gone before she hit the ground. Clean. Merciful. The only kindness Lila had left to give. She stood over the body for a long moment, the pistol hanging loose in her hand, and felt something inside her break clean through. Not her courage or her will to survive. Those remained intact, hard and sharp as obsidian. But the last soft part of her, the part that had believed in gentleness and safety and the basic decency of the world that died with Juniper in the mountain grass. Cole's hand on her shoulder brought her back. We need to move. I'm sorry, but I know. Lila's voice sounded distant to her own ears, hollowed out. I know. They took turns on Cole's Bay, moving as fast as the terrain allowed, following the creek downstream through the hidden valley and out into rougher country beyond. Behind them, the sound of pursuit had faded, but Lila couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of rifles trained on her back, of death waiting just beyond the next ridge. As the sun set, they made a cold camp in a cluster of boulders. No fire. Nothing that might give away their position. Cole shared his blanket without being asked, and they huddled together against the autumn chill, listening to the night sounds of the forest around them. I'm sorry about your horse, Cole said quietly. Don't. Lila's voice came out sharper than intended. Don't apologize for things that aren't your fault. Juniper gave me what she could, and I gave her the only mercy I had left. That's all there is to it. You're allowed to grieve. I'll grieve when I'm safe. Right now I need to stay angry. She looked at him in the darkness, seeing only the outline of his face against the stars. Anger keeps you moving. Grief just weighs you down. Cole was quiet for a long moment. That's what I told myself after Sarah died. Stayed angry for months, maybe years. Picked fights with anyone who looked at me wrong. Took jobs that were more about having an excuse for violence than about the money. He paused. But anger's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Eventually, it just eats you hollow. What did you do? I stopped fighting other people and started fighting for them. Figured if I couldn't save Sarah, maybe I could save someone else. His laugh was soft and bitter. Didn't work out quite like I planned. You saved me. Not yet, I haven't. You're still being hunted. Still got men trying to kill you. Still a long way from safe. Lila shifted closer, seeking warmth, seeking comfort, seeking something she couldn't quite name. Those men in the canyon, they weren't just trying to stop me. They were trying to erase me. Like I never existed, like I never mattered. You matter. Cole's voice was fierce. Mallory doesn't get to decide your worth. Nobody does except you. Then I decide I'm worth staying alive for. Lila looked up at the stars, at the same constellations her mother had told her stories about. Worth fighting for. Worth remembering. They reached the outskirts of Silver Falls 3 days later, exhausted and trail-worn and down to their last few dollars. The town sprawled across a steep hillside, buildings clinging to the slope like barnacles on a ship's hull. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, and even from a distance, Lila could hear the sound of industry. Hammers on anvils, saws cutting timber, the constant rumble of ore wagons on rocky streets. "It's bigger than I expected," Lila said. "Silver strikes bring people," Cole replied. "Some looking to get rich, most just looking to survive. Town like this, you can disappear pretty easy if you're careful." They rode in as twilight fell, and nobody gave them a second glance. Just two more dusty travelers on a tired horse, indistinguishable from the dozens of others who arrived daily seeking fortune or escape. Cole navigated the maze of streets with the confidence of someone who'd seen 100 mining towns just like this one, pulling up finally in front of a 2-story boarding house with a hand-painted sign reading Murphy's Rooms. A woman emerged as they dismounted, short and solid, with iron gray hair and sharp eyes that assessed them both in a single glance. "Help you folks?" "Jacob Tinsdale sent us," Cole said. "Said his cousin runs a boarding house here. That you?" The woman's expression shifted, wariness giving way to something warmer. "Jacob's my cousin, all right. I'm Nora Murphy." She looked them over more carefully. "You two in some kind of trouble?" "The kind that stays in New Mexico if we're lucky," Cole said. Nora nodded slowly. "Well, Jacob's vouching is good enough for me. I've got a room on the second floor, back corner, quiet, private, and I don't gossip about my tenants." She named a price that was fair, and Cole counted out coins without haggling. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and a washstand and a window that looked out over the eastern hills. After days of sleeping on hard ground, it seemed almost impossibly luxurious. Nora brought them hot water and towels, and a dinner of stew and bread that Lila ate mechanically, tasting nothing. When Nora had gone, Cole moved to the window, checking sight lines and escape routes with automatic thoroughness. "We should be safe here for a while. Town this size, it'll take time for Mallory to track us, even if he figures out where we went." "And then what?" Lila set down her spoon, appetite gone. "We keep running? Forever?" "No, you stay here, you build a life. You find work, you make friends, you become someone new." Cole's back was to her, his shoulders tense. "I'll move on in a few days, once I'm sure you're settled. Draw any pursuit away from you." "You're really going to leave?" It wasn't a question. "It's what I said I'd do." "That's not an answer." Cole turned then, and the exhaustion in his face was bone deep. "What do you want me to say, Lila? That I'll stay? Build a life here with you, pretend like I'm the kind of man who gets to have that?" He laughed, harsh and hurting. "I'm not. I'm a killer with a past that follows me like a shadow. Everywhere I go, eventually someone recognizes me, or someone from before finds me, or I do something stupid that puts everyone around me in danger. That's not a life I can ask you to share." "You're not asking, I'm offering." Lila stood, crossing the room to stand in front of him. "I know what you are, Cole. I know you've killed men. I know you've got blood on your hands. I know you're running from things you won't talk about. And I'm telling you, I don't care." "You should care." "Why?" "Because society says so. Because respectable people would be scandalized?" Her laugh was bitter. "I stopped being respectable the moment I ran away from a forced marriage. I stopped caring what society thinks when I shot a man to keep him from killing us. I'm not that girl anymore, Cole. I'm someone different, someone harder, someone who knows what it costs to survive. That's exactly why you deserve better than me." Cole's voice had gone quiet, almost pleading. "You fought so hard for your freedom. Don't tie yourself to someone who'll just drag you down." "Is that what you think you'd do? Drag me down?" Lila reached up, touching his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "You've done nothing but lift me up since the moment we met. You taught me to shoot, to track, to survive. You fought for me when you could have walked away. You stayed when staying meant risking your life. How is that dragging me down?" Cole caught her hand, holding it against his cheek, and the longing in his eyes was so raw it hurt to see. "Because eventually, I'll fail you. Eventually we'll both die, Cole. That's the only guarantee any of us get." Lila stepped closer, eliminating the last distance between them. But between now and then, we get to choose how we live, who we live with, what we fight for. And I'm choosing you. For a long moment, Cole just stared at her, and Lila could see the war happening inside him, want and fear and old grief battling for dominance. Then something shifted, some wall finally crumbling, and he pulled her into his arms with a desperation that spoke of years of loneliness, of a man who'd convinced himself he didn't deserve gentleness, finding it anyway. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, and Lila felt something in her chest unknot. She'd lost so much, her home, her horse, the innocent girl she'd been. But here in Cole's arms she found something worth keeping, something worth fighting for. When they finally pulled apart, Cole's expression had softened, walls down for the first time since she'd met him. "I'm not good at staying," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can do this." "Then we'll figure it out together." Lila managed a small smile. "I'm not good at being free, or at trusting people, or at half a dozen other things. But I'm learning. We both are. And if Mallory finds us, if someone from my past shows up, then we deal with it, together." She squeezed his hands. "I'm tired of running alone, Cole, and I think you are too." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, we try. But if it gets too dangerous, if staying puts you at risk, we make that decision together too." Lila's voice was firm. "No more of you deciding what's best for me without asking. We're partners now, or we're nothing. Understood?" A real smile crossed Cole's face then, transforming it. "When did you get so bossy?" "About the time I shot a man and put down my own horse. Figured if I could do that, I could tell you when you're being an idiot." Cole laughed, and the sound was genuine, free of the bitterness and regret that usually colored it. "Fair enough." They spent the next few days settling into Silver Falls, learning the rhythms of the town, finding their place in its chaotic fabric. Lila took work at a seamstress shop, using skills her mother had taught her years ago. The owner, a widow named Mrs. Chen, asked few questions and paid fair wages, grateful for help with the backlog of mending and alterations that came with a booming mining town. Cole found work as a guard for one of the smaller mining operations, a job that paid well and asked only that he be willing to carry a gun and look dangerous. He was good at both. They kept their connection quiet at first, not wanting to draw attention or speculation, but gradually, as days became weeks and no pursuit materialized, they allowed themselves small liberties, walking together in the evenings, sharing meals at the boarding house, building something that looked almost like a normal life. Then, on a cold morning in late October, everything changed. Lila was at the seamstress shop, working on a wedding dress for one of the mine owner's daughters, when a man walked in that made her blood run cold. Not Mallory, someone worse. Cyrus Granger, the bounty hunter from the cave fight, looking travel-worn but determined. He didn't see her at first, too busy scanning the shop, and Lila ducked behind a rack of dresses, heart hammering. She could hear Mrs. Chen greeting him, asking how she could help, and Granger's rough voice responding. "Looking for someone. Young woman, maybe 19 or 20, dark hair, traveling with a man named Cole Rourke. Heard they might have come through here." "I don't know anyone by that description," Mrs. Chen said carefully, "but I just took over this shop a few months ago. You might ask at the marshal's office." Lila risked a glance around the dress rack and saw Granger studying Mrs. Chen's face, looking for tells, for signs of deception. Then his gaze swept the shop, and for one terrible moment, Lila thought he'd see her, thought the careful life they'd built would shatter right here among the thread and fabric. But Mrs. Chen moved to block his view, chattering about how she'd love to help, but she really was quite new to town, and perhaps the boarding houses would have records, and Granger finally gave up and left. Lila waited until his footsteps faded before emerging, her whole body shaking. Mrs. Chen looked at her with knowing eyes. "You need to warn your man," she said quietly. That hunter looked serious. Thank you for not. I came to Silver Falls to escape something too," Mrs. Chen said. "Different circumstances, but same need for a fresh start. I'm not about to ruin someone else's chance at that." She paused. "But you should know. If he's asking around town, others will talk. Not everyone has my reasons for discretion." Lila ran all the way to the mine, not caring who saw, not caring about the stares from townspeople unused to seeing a woman sprint through the streets like something was chasing her. She found Cole coming off shift, covered in rock dust, and the moment he saw her face, his expression went hard. What happened? Granger's here, in town. He was at the shop, asking about us. Cole swore, already moving. Did he see you? No, Mrs. Chen covered for me, but Cole, if he's here, then Mallory's not far behind. Cole's mind was already working, calculating angles and odds. We need to leave, tonight, before word spreads that we're here. And go where? We've run out of territory, Cole. We can't keep doing this. We don't have a choice. Yes, we do. Lila grabbed his arm, stopping him. We stop running. We make a stand. We end this. Cole stared at her like she'd lost her mind. End it how? You want to shoot it out with Granger and however many men Mallory's brought with him? That's suicide. No, I want to face Mallory legally. Get a lawyer, file charges, make him answer for trying to buy a human being. Lila's voice was stronger than she felt. I'm tired of being hunted, Cole. Tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of building a life I know we'll have to abandon. If we're going to stay together, if we're going to have any kind of future, we have to deal with this now. The law's not on your side, Lila. Mallory's got money and influence, and I've got the truth, and a witness who helped me, who fought for me, who can testify about what really happened. She met his eyes. You said you'd stay. You said we'd face things together. I'm holding you to that. Cole's jaw worked, and Lila could see him fighting every instinct that said to run, to keep moving, to never stop long enough for the past to catch up. But finally, he nodded. All right. We make a stand, but we do it smart, we do it careful, and if it starts to go wrong, we trust each other, Lila finished. That's the only plan we need. They went to the marshal's office together, hands clasped, ready to tell their story to whoever would listen. Ready to fight not with guns, but with words, with truth, with the stubborn insistence that Lila Hart was a person, not property, and that she had the right to choose her own life. The marshal, a balding man named Garrett, with tired eyes and a patient manner, listened to their story without interruption. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. That's quite a tale. You got any proof of what you're saying? The truth isn't enough? Truth's a slippery thing in court, miss. Mallory's going to have his own version, probably with documents and witnesses to back it up. You need more than just your word. What about my word? Cole said quietly. I'm witness to everything that happened. The ambush, the fight, Mallory claiming she was his property. Garrett looked at him, recognition flickering across his face. Cole Rourke, heard about you. Heard you killed a man in Colorado a few years back. I was cleared of that charge. Maybe so, but it doesn't make you the most credible witness. Garrett drummed his fingers on the desk. Here's what I can do. I can hold off Granger, tell him jurisdiction says I need to investigate before anyone gets arrested or handed over. That'll buy you a few days, maybe a week. You use that time to get a lawyer, build a real case. Can you do that? Lila thought of the few dollars they had left, of the impossibility of affording legal help. We don't have money for— Talk to Sarah Brennan, Garrett interrupted. Lawyer who just set up practice here, fresh out of law school in Denver. She's young, and she's got more ideals than sense, which means she might take your case just because it's the right thing to do. He scribbled an address on paper. Tell her I sent you. Tell her it's important. They found Sarah Brennan in a small office above the general store, surrounded by law books and looking barely older than Lila herself. She listened to their story with sharp attention, asking questions that got to the heart of the matter with surgical precision. When they finished, she sat back and whistled softly. This is either going to make my career or end it before it starts. She grinned. Either way, it sounds like fun. I'll take your case. We can't afford— Lila began. Then you'll pay me when you can. Or not at all. Doesn't matter. Sarah's eyes were bright with conviction. I became a lawyer to fight injustice, and a man buying another human being in this day and age, that's about as unjust as it gets. Over the next 3 days, Sarah built their case with ferocious determination. She took depositions, gathered evidence, tracked down anyone who'd had dealings with Mallory and might be willing to testify. She found Mrs. Chen willing to speak about what she'd heard from other women who dealt with Mallory. She found a clerk from Red Willow who'd witnessed the transaction and was willing to describe it in detail. And she found, buried in New Mexico law, a statute that made it illegal to force anyone into marriage against their will, regardless of what their guardian might have agreed to. It's not much, Sarah admitted, and Mallory's lawyers will fight it every way they can. But it's something. It's a chance. On the fourth day, Briggs Mallory arrived in Silver Falls with 3 lawyers and Cyrus Granger by his side. The confrontation happened in the street outside the boarding house, drawn by the presence of too many armed men in too small a space. Townspeople gathered to watch, sensing drama, and Lila found herself at the center of a crowd, with Cole on one side and Sarah Brennan on the other. Mallory looked worse than she remembered, jowly face red with rage, legs still bandaged from where she'd shot him, eyes glittering with something that might have been madness or just wounded pride elevated to obsession. "There she is," he snarled, pointing at Lila. "My property, my fiancée, stolen by that man and corrupted into thinking she had the right to refuse me." "Miss Hart is not your property," Sarah Brennan said calmly, "and under New Mexico law, you had no legal right to force her into marriage regardless of what her guardian agreed to." One of Mallory's lawyers, a smooth man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. Mr. Mallory entered into a legal contract with Miss Hart's legal guardian. The marriage was to be the culmination of that contract. Miss Hart's refusal constitutes breach of contract and theft of Mr. Mallory's investment. "You can't breach a contract you never agreed to," Sarah shot back, "and human beings are not investments." The argument escalated, lawyers on both sides trading citations and precedents, and Lila stood frozen at the center of it, watching her life be debated like it was some abstract legal question instead of flesh and blood and the right to choose her own future. Then Mallory's composure finally snapped. "Enough!" He pushed past his lawyers, face contorted with rage. "I don't care about laws or contracts or any of this legal nonsense. I paid for her, she belongs to me, and I'm taking her back to Red Willow, where she'll learn what happens to women who embarrass me." He lunged for Lila, and 3 things happened almost simultaneously. Cole moved to intercept, hand dropping to his gun. Granger drew on Cole, clearly under orders to kill him if he interfered. And Lila, remembering everything Cole had taught her about courage and choice, and refusing to be a victim, stepped forward instead of back, and drove her knee into Mallory's groin with every ounce of strength she possessed. Mallory went down like a felled tree, gasping and clutching himself. And in the stunned silence that followed, Lila looked down at him with all the cold fury of the past weeks. "I am not your property," she said, voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. "I am not your investment, or your fiancé, or your anything. I am a human being with the right to decide my own future. And I decide that future does not include you." Marshal Garrett pushed through the crowd, gun drawn. "All right, that's enough excitement for one day. Mr. Mallory, I'm going to have to ask you and your men to come with me until we can sort this out legal-like." "You can't arrest me," Mallory wheezed from the ground. "I'm the victim here. She defended herself from assault," Garrett said mildly. "Whole town saw you lunge at her. Whole town heard you claim you own another human being. Now, you can come peaceful to my office, or I can add resisting arrest to the charges. Your choice." In the end, it took 2 more weeks and a circuit judge to finally settle things. Sarah Brennan argued their case with passionate precision, and Cole testified about everything he'd witnessed, and even Marshal Wardell, the lawman from New Mexico who'd let them go, rode in to speak on Lila's behalf, saying he'd seen the bruises on Mallory's first wife, had heard the rumors, had his own doubts about the man's character. The judge, a gray-bearded man with no tolerance for legal sophistry, ruled that Lila had been coerced, that no contract entered into without her consent was binding, and that Mallory had no legal claim to her person or her future. He fined Mallory for attempted assault and banned him from contacting Lila ever again. When the gavel fell, Lila felt something inside her finally, truly release. Not just freedom from Mallory, but freedom from fear, from being hunted, from the constant need to run. Outside the courthouse, with autumn sunlight warm on her face and Cole's hand in hers, Lila breathed deeply and let herself believe it was finally over. "What now?" Cole asked quietly. Lila looked at him, this hard, dangerous man who'd saved her with water and weapons, and the simple act of treating her like she mattered, and smiled. Now we build that life we talked about, the one we choose, together. I'm still not good at staying. Then I'll teach you, same way you taught me to shoot. She squeezed his hand. We've got nothing but time, Cole roared. Might as well spend it learning. And for the first time in years, Cole smiled like he believed it might actually be possible. The celebration that night at Murphy's boarding house was modest. Just Lila and Cole, Sarah Brennan, Marshall Garrett, and Nora Murphy sharing coffee and apple pie in the small dining room. But it felt like more than a simple gathering. It felt like the beginning of something Lila had never quite believed possible, a life built on her own terms, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with her rather than against her. To justice, Sarah said, raising her coffee cup, and to clients who make the fight worthwhile. They toasted, and Lila caught Cole's eye across the table. He was smiling, really smiling, in a way that made him look younger and less burdened. She'd done that, she thought with quiet wonder. She'd given him permission to believe in something beyond survival and running, given him a reason to stay. After the others had drifted away, Lila and Cole found themselves alone on the boarding house porch, watching Silver Falls settle into its nighttime rhythms. Lamplight spilled from windows, and somewhere down the street a piano played badly but enthusiastically. The air held the sharp promise of winter coming, but for now it was just cool enough to be pleasant. What are you thinking? Lila asked. Cole was quiet for a moment, gaze fixed on the darkened hills beyond town. I'm thinking I don't remember the last time I felt like I could stop looking over my shoulder, like maybe the running's actually over. Are you afraid it won't last? Terrified, he admitted. Everything good I've ever had, I've lost. Part of me keeps waiting for the other boot to drop. Lila moved closer, leaning against his shoulder. Then we'll just have to prove that part of you wrong, day by day, until you believe it. And if I never quite believe it, then I'll believe it for both of us. She looked up at him. That's what partners do, right? Carry each other when the weight gets too heavy. Cole wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close against the evening chill. I don't deserve you, Lila Hart. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They stood like that for a long time, watching stars emerge one by one in the deepening darkness. And Lila let herself imagine a future that stretched beyond the next threat, the next narrow escape. A future with roots instead of dust, with building instead of running, with choice instead of survival. But the universe, she was learning, had its own ideas about timing. The trouble came 3 days later, not from Mallory, but from a direction Cole had feared all along, his own past. Lila was walking back from the seamstress shop, arms full of fabric Mrs. Chen had let her purchase at cost for making her own proper winter dresses, when she noticed the stranger. He stood across the street studying the buildings with the careful attention of someone memorizing layout and exits. Tall, lean, with a scarred face and cold eyes that cataloged everything they touched. Something about him made Lila's instincts scream danger. She ducked into the general store, watching through the window as the stranger moved down the street with purposeful strides. When he stopped in front of the mine office where Cole worked, Lila's stomach dropped. She abandoned her fabric with a startled clerk and ran, not caring about dignity or propriety, driven by the same instinct that had made her turn back at the cave instead of running. Cole had stood with her against Mallory. She'd stand with him against whatever ghost from his past had finally caught up. She reached the mine office as the stranger was coming out, and his eyes, pale blue and utterly empty of warmth, fixed on her with unsettling focus. But he said nothing, just tipped his hat with mocking courtesy and continued down the street. Cole emerged a moment later, face gray beneath his tan, and when he saw Lila, his expression went from shock to resignation. You saw him. Who is he? Trouble. Cole took her arm, steering her away from the mine office, away from potential listeners. His name's Elias Cade. We worked together during the Apache campaigns back when I was scouting for the Army. He was... Cole paused, choosing words carefully. He was the kind of soldier who enjoyed the killing more than the protecting. After the war ended, he turned bounty hunter, one of the best and one of the worst. Why is he here? Because someone's paying him to be here. Someone who wants either me dead or wants to use me for something. Cole's hand had drifted to his gun, unconscious gesture of a man expecting violence. Cade doesn't do social calls. If he's in Silver Falls, it's because there's money involved. They reached the boarding house, and Cole immediately began packing his saddlebags with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times. Lila watched for a moment, then moved to block the door. "What are you doing?" "Leaving, before Cade decides to make his move and you get caught in the crossfire." "No." Lila's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "We agreed. No more running. No more you deciding what's best for me without asking. This is different. How? How is this different from Mallory or Granger or any of the other threats we've faced?" She crossed her arms. "You think I can't handle danger? You think I'm suddenly too fragile to stand beside you?" "I think Cade's a killer who won't hesitate to use you to get to me." Cole's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. "I think he's probably been hired by someone from Colorado who still holds a grudge about Clayton Morse. I think if I stay here, I'm putting not just you but this whole town at risk. Then we find out what he wants, and we deal with it, together." Lila moved closer. "You said you'd stay. You said we'd build something. Was that all just words, Cole? The moment trouble shows up, you're ready to abandon everything we've started?" The words hit harder than she'd intended, and she saw Cole flinch, but his jaw remained set, stubborn. "I'm trying to protect you." "I don't want protection. I want partnership." Lila took his hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I know you're scared. I know every good thing you've had has been taken from you, but you can't prevent loss by running from it. You just end up alone. Maybe alone is safer." "Safer for who? Not for me. Not for you either, if you're honest." She squeezed his hands. "Please, Cole, don't do this. Don't throw away what we're building because you're afraid it won't last." Cole stood frozen, torn between instinct and hope, between the habits of a lifetime and the possibility of something different. Finally, he closed his eyes and breathed out slowly. "All right, we find out what Cade wants. But if it gets dangerous, we face it together," Lila finished. "Stop trying to negotiate exceptions. Either you trust me to stand with you, or you don't." "I trust you. It's the world I don't trust." "Then we'll just have to be more stubborn than the world." Lila managed a small smile. "I've gotten pretty good at stubborn lately." That evening, Elias Cade came to them. He knocked on their door at the boarding house with the casual confidence of someone who knew he held all the cards. And when Cole opened the door, the bounty hunter smiled without warmth. "Rourke, been a long time." "Not long enough." Cole didn't invite him in, didn't move from blocking the doorway. "What do you want, Cade?" "Just to talk. Maybe we could do that civilized-like, instead of shouting in hallways?" Cade's gaze slid past Cole to where Lila stood, and his smile widened. "That the girl you nearly started a war over? Pretty little thing. I can see why you'd fight for her." "Don't," Cole said quietly, and something in his voice made Cade's smile falter. "Don't talk about her. Don't look at her. Don't even think about her. You've got business with me. State it and leave." Cade raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, Rourke. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to make you an offer." "I'm not interested." "You haven't heard it yet." "Don't need to. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." Cole started to close the door, but Cade wedged his boot in the gap. "Martin Declan wants to talk to you." The name hung in the air like a curse, and Lila saw Cole go absolutely still. "Declan's dead. He died in prison 5 years ago. That's what the official records say. What they don't say is that he bought his way out, changed his name, and set himself up in Denver running the same criminal enterprise he always did." Cade's voice was casual, conversational. "And he's been looking for you, Rourke. Looking hard. Seems he blames you for testifying against him, getting him locked up in the first place. I told the truth about what I saw. He was running guns to hostiles, getting soldiers killed. Someone needed to stop him. And you did. Very heroic." Cade's tone made it clear what he thought of heroism. "Problem is, Declan doesn't see it that way. He sees betrayal. He sees a man who put him in prison and cost him 5 years of freedom, and he wants that debt paid. Then let him come after me himself instead of sending hired dogs." Cade's expression went cold. "I'm nobody's dog, Rourke. I'm an independent contractor, and Declan's not sending me to kill you, though believe me, he'd pay well for that. He's sending me to bring you to Denver so you two can have a conversation, man to man. A conversation, Cole repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling executions now? Declan swears on his mother's grave, rest her miserable soul, that he just wants to talk. Says if you come peaceful, answer his questions, he'll consider the debt settled. Cade shrugged. Of course, you don't come peaceful. He's authorized me to bring you by force, or to make life very difficult for anyone you care about until you change your mind. The threat was barely veiled, and Lila felt ice slide down her spine. She moved to Cole's side, refusing to be intimidated. He's not going anywhere with you. Cade looked at her with those empty eyes, and Lila understood suddenly why Cole had been so worried. This man wasn't just dangerous, he was fundamentally broken in some essential way, lacking whatever piece of humanity made people care about consequences or suffering. Miss, this doesn't concern you. Everything concerning Cole concerns me, Lila cut him off. And if your employer thinks he can threaten me into compliance, he's miscalculated badly. I've already faced down one man who thought he owned me. I'm not afraid of another. Something that might have been respect flickered across Cade's face. You've got spirit. That's good. You'll need it if Rourke here decides to be stubborn. When does Declan want this conversation? Cole asked. Soon as possible. I've got orders to bring you to Denver within the week. Cade reached into his coat, slowly, letting Cole see the movement wasn't a draw, and pulled out an envelope. Travel money. Payment in advance as a show of good faith. Declan knows you've got responsibilities now, knows you'll need to make arrangements. Cole took the envelope without opening it. And if I refuse? Then things get unpleasant. For you, for the girl, for anyone in this town who tries to help you. Declan's got a long reach and a lot of money. He can make life very difficult for a very long time. Or, Lila said suddenly, the idea forming even as she spoke, we go to the law. Tell them Martin Declan's alive, that he's threatening us, that he's running criminal operations out of Denver. Cade laughed, the sound genuinely amused. Oh, that's sweet. You really think the law cares about the word of a drifter and a runaway girl against a man who's got half the police force on his payroll? He shook his head. No, miss. There's no law coming to save you here. There's just a simple choice. Rourke comes to Denver for a conversation, or everyone he cares about suffers until he does. How do we know Declan will keep his word? Cole asked. How do we know he won't just kill me the moment I arrive? You don't. But you know Declan's a businessman. Revenge is satisfying, but it's not profitable. He wants answers more than he wants your corpse. Cade moved toward the stairs. You've got 3 days to decide. After that, I start making things uncomfortable. And trust me, Rourke, you don't want me as an enemy. He descended the stairs and vanished into the night, leaving Cole and Lila standing in the doorway with the envelope of blood money between them. Cole opened it finally, counting the bills inside. $500. More than most people see in a year. His voice was hollow. That's what my life's worth to Declan. That's what he's willing to pay to get me in a room where he can either kill me or get whatever answers he thinks I have. You're not going. Lila closed the door, shutting out the night. We'll find another way. There is no other way. Cade was right. The law won't help. Declan's got too much money, too much influence. And if I don't go, he'll come after you to force my hand. Cole sat heavily on the bed, head in his hands. I've been running from this for 5 years. Maybe it's time to stop running and face it. Face it by walking into a trap? That's not courage, Cole. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's my choice to make. No. Lila knelt in front of him, forcing him to look at her. You don't get to make that choice alone. Not anymore. We're partners, remember? Which means we decide together how to handle this. And what would you have me do, Lila? Refuse and watch Cade burn down everything we've built? Watch him hurt you to punish me? I'd have you fight. I'd have you use that brilliant tactical mind to find a way out that doesn't involve surrendering to a man who wants you dead. She gripped his hands. You taught me to survive. You taught me to make hard choices. Now I'm teaching you that sometimes the hardest choice is accepting that you're not alone anymore. Cole was quiet for a long time, and Lila could see him wrestling with years of solitary survival, years of making decisions based solely on his own expendability. Finally he spoke, voice rough with emotion. I don't know how to do this. How to let someone else share the risk. Then we learn together. Same way we've learned everything else. Lila stood, pulling him up with her. First thing we do is talk to people we trust. Sarah Brennan's clever. Maybe she knows a legal angle Cade doesn't. Marshall Garrett's been around. Maybe he's heard of Declan, knows his weaknesses. We gather information, we make a plan, and we find a way through this that doesn't end with you dead in Denver. Over the next 2 days, they did exactly that. Sarah researched Colorado law and found that if Declan was operating under a false identity, any business he'd conducted might be legally void. Marshall Garrett sent telegrams to contacts in Denver and learned that Declan, operating as Martin Delaney, was indeed running criminal operations, but he was also making generous donations to police widows' funds and sitting on charity boards, building a veneer of respectability. He's smart, Garrett admitted, smart enough to make himself untouchable through conventional means. But everyone's got weaknesses. We just need to find his. They were still searching for that weakness when Cade made his first move. Lila was at the seamstress shop when it happened. A small fire started in the back room. Later, investigation would show it was deliberately set. And in the confusion of evacuation, someone snatched Mrs. Chen's cash box containing the week's receipts. The theft wasn't about money. It was about sending a message. Cade could strike anywhere, anytime, and conventional law couldn't stop him. That night, Cole found a note slipped under their door. 2 days left. Make your choice. He's escalating, Cole said grimly. Next time it won't be just property. Someone's going to get hurt. Then we don't wait for next time. Lila had been thinking about this all day, turning it over in her mind, examining it from every angle. We set a trap. With what bait? Me. Cole's expression went from interested to furious in a heartbeat. Absolutely not. Think about it. Cade wants you compliant, wants you scared enough to surrender. The best way to do that is to threaten me directly. Lila spoke quickly, trying to get the whole plan out before Cole shut her down completely. So we give him the opportunity. We make me vulnerable, let him make his move, and when he does, we're ready. Ready how? You want to shoot it out with a professional bounty hunter who's killed more men than you've met in your whole life? No, I want to catch him in the act of assault or kidnapping, with witnesses, and have him arrested by Marshall Garrett. Once he's in custody, we can use him as leverage against Declan. Either Declan backs off, or we testify about his operations and his threats, and suddenly his respectable Denver businessman persona crumbles. Cole stared at her like she'd suggested they sprout wings and fly. That's insane, He paused, mind clearly working through the angles. That's actually not terrible. But too dangerous, Lila finished for him. I know that's what you're going to say, but Cole, we're out of options. We can't run forever. We can't hide forever. And we can't live under the constant threat of Cade hurting innocent people to flush you out. So we take the fight to him, on our terms, in a way that gives us control. If anything goes wrong, then we improvise. We've gotten good at that. Lila moved to the window, looking out at Silver Falls sleeping under stars. I'm not the scared girl you found dying in the desert anymore. I've fought and I've killed and I've survived things I never thought I could. Trust me to do this, Cole. Trust that I'm strong enough. She could feel him struggling with it, could practically hear the war between his protective instincts and his respect for her autonomy. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. If we do this, and I'm not saying we are, we do it smart. We plan every detail, we have backup plans for the backup plans, and at the first sign things are going wrong, we abort. Agreed? Agreed. They spent the next day setting the stage. Sarah Brennan agreed to help, as did Nora Murphy and even Mrs. Chen, who had her own grievances with men who thought they could intimidate women into submission. Marshall Garrett was harder to convince, worried about liability and the dangers of using civilians as bait, but eventually he agreed to position himself and 2 deputies nearby, ready to intervene. The plan was simple. Lila would be alone at the seamstress shop after hours, ostensibly catching up on work. Cole would be visible at the saloon across the street, drinking and playing cards, clearly not watching over her. Cade, seeing an easy target, would make his move. When he did, witnesses would see him assaulting or attempting to kidnap Lila, and Garrett would arrest him. Simple plans, Lila had learned, rarely survived contact with reality. She sat in the dimly lit shop that evening, needle and thread in her hands, but too nervous to actually sew. Outside, she could hear Silver Falls going about its evening business. Voices from the saloon, the rattle of an ore wagon, someone singing badly and drunkenly. Normal sounds of a normal night, except Lila's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The minutes crawled past. An hour. 2. Lila began to wonder if Cade had somehow sensed the trap, if he was too smart to take such obvious bait. Then the door opened and Elias Cade stepped inside. He looked around the shop with casual interest, hands empty and visible, posture relaxed. "Working late, Miss Hart?" Lila kept her voice steady. "The shop's closed. You'll have to come back tomorrow." "Oh, I'm not here for tailoring." Cade moved deeper into the room, and Lila noticed he'd positioned himself between her and the door. "I'm here to deliver a message. From a friend." "I don't have any friends who'd use you as a messenger." Cade smiled. "That's hurtful, and probably accurate." He perched on the edge of a table, still casual, still non-threatening. "Time's almost up, Miss Hart. Rourke needs to make his decision. Is he going to Denver, or am I going to start making examples?" "He's made his decision." Lila set down her sewing, making sure her hands stayed visible, making sure anyone watching would see she wasn't threatening. "He's not going. Not now. Not ever. And if you or Declan come after us again, we'll make sure every law enforcement agency in the territory knows about your criminal operations." That's a bold statement from a woman alone in a shop at night. Cade's smile never wavered. "You sure you want to make threats you can't back up?" "I'm not alone. And these aren't threats, they're promises." Cade's expression flickered, the first sign he'd sensed something wrong. "That's so? Well, then maybe I should—" He moved fast, faster than Lila expected, lunging across the space between them and grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. Lila gasped, not entirely faked, and struggled, making sure her voice carried clearly to the street outside. "Let go of me! Help! Someone help!" The door burst open, and Marshal Garrett rushed in with his deputies, guns drawn. "Let her go, Cade, now!" For just a moment, Cade looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression went cold and calculating. He released Lila's arm and raised his hand slowly. "Just a misunderstanding, Marshal. The lady and I were having a conversation. Conversation that involved assault." Garrett moved closer. "I've got 3 witnesses outside who saw you grab her. That's enough for me to hold you." "On what charge? Having a disagreement with a seamstress?" "Assault with intent to kidnap. Threatening behavior. And I'm sure once we start digging, we'll find a few outstanding warrants." Garrett gestured to his deputies. "Take him." Cade didn't resist as they cuffed him, but his eyes never left Lila's face. "This isn't over. You know that, right? You've bought yourself maybe a week, maybe 2, but Declan's patient, and he's got resources you can't imagine. Eventually, Rourke's going to have to face him." "Maybe," Lila said quietly, "but it won't be on Declan's terms, and it won't be alone." They led Cade away, and Cole burst into the shop a moment later, face gray with barely controlled fear. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine. Bruised, but fine." Lila rubbed her arm where Cade had grabbed her. "And we got him. The plan worked." This time, Cole pulled her into his arms, and she could feel him shaking. "Next time, we might not be so lucky." "Then we make our own luck." Lila pulled back enough to see his face. "We've got Cade in custody. Now we use him to pressure Declan. We make it clear that coming after us costs more than it's worth." Sarah Brennan appeared in the doorway, grinning like a wolf. "I've already sent a telegram to Denver. Told the authorities there that we've arrested a known associate of Martin Delaney, also known as Martin Declan, on charges of assault and attempted kidnapping. Asked if they'd like to question him about any other criminal activities he might be involved in." "Will they?" "Probably not. But Declan doesn't know that. And even if his pet cops won't move against him, there are still honest lawmen in Denver. Men who'd love to have an excuse to investigate a suspected criminal." Sarah's grin widened. Sometimes the threat of exposure is more effective than actual exposure. Over the next 3 days, they watched and waited. Cade remained in custody, refusing to talk, refusing to cooperate, but the simple fact of his arrest seemed to have given Declan pause. No more fires, no more thefts, no more threats. On the 4th day, a telegram arrived from Denver. It was addressed to Cole, sent from a lawyer's office, and the message was brief. Your debt is paid. Stay out of Colorado. Cole read it twice, then handed it to Lila without a word. She studied the terse message, trying to parse its meaning. He's letting it go? Just like that? He's a businessman first, vindictive second. We've made continuing the feud more expensive than it's worth. Cole's voice was cautious, like he didn't quite trust this victory. And arresting Cade sent a message. We're not easy targets, and we're willing to involve law enforcement even if it costs us. So it's over? Maybe. Or maybe it's just dormant. Cole took the telegram back, folding it carefully. Either way, we've bought ourselves time. Time to build roots deep enough that Declan can't easily pull them up. Marshal Garrett agreed to release Cade on the condition he leave Colorado and never return. The bounty hunter left Silver Falls without a backward glance, already moving on to his next job, his next payday. Lila watched him ride out and felt only relief that some threats could be neutralized without bloodshed. That night, alone in their room, Cole and Lila finally allowed themselves to breathe. We did it, Lila said wonderingly. We actually survived. We did. Cole pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You did. That plan was crazy and dangerous, and it worked because you had the courage to be the bait. I had the courage because you taught me how to fight, how to refuse to be a victim. Lila tilted her head back to see his face. We make a good team, Cole Rourke. The best. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. And I'm sorry. For trying to leave. For thinking I could protect you better by running than by staying. You're forgiven, as long as you understand that staying is the harder choice, but it's the right one. I'm starting to believe that. Cole's smile was real, reaching his eyes for the first time in days. Starting to believe a lot of things I never thought possible. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as Silver Falls settled into sleep around them, and Lila felt the future opening up in ways it never had before. Not a future of running and hiding and constant fear, but one of building and choosing, and maybe, finally, being happy. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent, covering the mountain town in white. Inside, warm and safe, and together, Lila and Cole made quiet plans for the life they were going to build, day by day, choice by choice, until the pass finally loosened its grip enough to let them be free. The snow fell steadily through the night, and by morning, Silver Falls was transformed into something from a storybook, white and clean and beautiful in the way that made you forget how harsh the world could be. Lila stood at the window watching the town wake up under its blanket of white, and for the first time since leaving Red Willow, she let herself think about the future not in terms of survival, but in terms of living. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. The fact that we might actually get to stay here, build something real. She leaned back against him. It feels strange. Like I'm waiting for someone to tell me it's all a mistake, that I don't get to have this. You get to have this. We both do. His voice was warm against her ear. We fought for it, earned it with blood and courage, and refusing to give up when giving up would have been easier. Do you think it'll last? Or will there always be another Mallory, another Declan, another threat coming down the road? Cole was quiet for a moment, and Lila appreciated that he didn't immediately offer empty reassurances. There'll always be threats. That's the nature of living. But we're not running anymore, which means we get to face them from a position of strength instead of desperation. And we're together, which means we're twice as strong as we were alone. Lila turned in his arms to face him. When did you become an optimist? About the time a stubborn girl refused to let me leave and taught me that staying was braver than running. He smiled, and it still amazed her how much younger he looked when he smiled like that, how the years and the weight seemed to fall away. You changed me, Lila Hart. Made me believe I could be more than my past. And you changed me. Made me believe I was worth fighting for. She reached up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. We're good for each other. The best. They stood like that for a long moment, and Lila felt the last pieces of fear and uncertainty finally settling into something like peace. Not the absence of danger. She understood now that would never truly exist. But the confidence that whatever came, They'd face it together. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Cole tensed reflexively, hand drifting toward where his gun hung on the bedpost. But it was just Nora Murphy's cheerful voice calling through the wood. "Breakfast is ready when you two are done being romantic, and there's someone here asking for Miss Hart." Lila and Cole exchanged glances. "Expecting anyone?" he asked. "No, you?" They descended the stairs together, Cole slightly ahead, still protective despite everything. In the dining room, sitting at the long table with a cup of coffee and an expression of patient amusement, sat Marshal Tom Wardell from New Mexico. Lila's heart kicked into a faster rhythm, old fears rising despite herself. But Wardell stood when he saw her, removing his hat respectfully. "Miss Hart, Rourke. Hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Depends on why you're here," Cole said, not quite hostile but definitely wary. "Peace mission, mostly." Wardell accepted the coffee Nora poured for him. "Wanted to let you know that Briggs Mallory left New Mexico territory, headed back east to family holdings in Virginia. Word is he's too embarrassed to stay after losing in court to a girl and her lawyer." Relief flooded through Lila so powerfully she had to sit down. "He's really gone? He's not going to keep coming after me?" "He's gone. And even if he wanted to keep trying, the judge made it very clear that any further attempts to contact or harass you would result in jail time." Wardell smiled. "You're free, Miss Hart, truly free. Thought you deserved to hear that from someone official." "Thank you." Lila's voice came out choked. "Thank you for coming all this way to tell me." "Well, that's not the only reason I'm here." Wardell pulled an envelope from his coat. "Your uncle Silas died 3 weeks ago. Drank himself to death, the doctor said. Though between you and me, I think it was more like shame and guilt ate him from the inside until there was nothing left." Lila took the envelope, feeling nothing at the news except a distant sadness for what might have been if Silas had been a different kind of man. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he left a will. Not much of one, but it names you as his only living relative. The boarding house in Red Willow is yours, along with about $200 in savings he hadn't drunk or gambled away yet." Wardell paused. "It's not much of an inheritance, but it's something. Thought you should know you have options." The envelope felt heavy in Lila's hands, weighted with complicated emotions. The boarding house had been her prison, the place where her uncle had sold her like livestock. But it had also been her home, the place where her mother had lived and loved and taught Lila to be strong, even when the world tried to break her. "What happens if I don't want it?" she asked. "Then it gets sold at auction, and the money goes to settling his debts, which are considerable." Wardell sipped his coffee. "But you should think about it before you decide. Property's worth something, and you could sell it yourself, keep the profit, start fresh with real money in your pocket." Lila looked at Cole, seeking his input without words. He squeezed her hand. "Your choice. Whatever you decide, we'll make it work." "I need to think about it." "Take your time. I'm in town for a few days anyway." Wardell stood, settling his hat back on his head. "One more thing. That tracker, Cyrus Granger, he was found dead in a ravine about 50 miles south of Red Willow. Horse threw him, looks like. Broke his neck in the fall." The news should have brought satisfaction, but Lila felt only a tired sort of resignation. Another man dead. Another life ended badly. The violence just kept rippling outward, touching everyone, leaving scars that never quite healed. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said, and meant it. Not sorry that Granger couldn't hunt her anymore, but sorry that the world was the kind of place that created men like Granger in the first place. After Wardell left, Lila sat at the table turning the envelope over in her hands. $200 and a building full of memories both good and terrible. The practical part of her knew what she should do: sell it, take the money, build something new. But the part that was still her mother's daughter hesitated. "Talk to me," Cole said quietly. "I hated that place. Hated what it represented, what my uncle did there. But my mother lived there. She sang in the kitchen and grew herbs in the window boxes and made it feel like home, even when everything else was falling apart." Lila's voice caught. "I don't want to lose the last piece of her." "Then don't. Or do, if that's what you need to move forward. There's no wrong answer here, Lila." "What would you do?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I'd ask myself what would honor her memory better. keeping a building that holds as much pain as love, or using the resources it represents to build something new, something wholly yours. The wisdom of it settled over Lila like a blanket. Her mother hadn't loved the building. She'd loved Lila. And the best way to honor that love was to use every resource available to build the kind of life her mother would have wanted for her daughter. "I'll sell it," Lila said. "Use the money to start something here. Maybe buy into Mrs. Chen's seamstress shop. Make it a real partnership, or start something of my own." "That sounds like a good plan." Over the next week, Lila worked with Sarah Brennan to handle the legal details of the inheritance. It turned out the boarding house was worth more than expected, nearly $800 once Silas's debts were settled. Combined with what Lila and Cole had saved from their work in Silver Falls, it was enough to think about real plans, real futures. "You could buy a house," Sarah suggested. "Small one, maybe, but yours. No more boarding house rooms, no more sharing walls with strangers." The idea sent a thrill through Lila. A house, a home, something that belonged to her, that nobody could take away or sell or use to control her. "Is that crazy? We've only been together a few months." "You've faced death together multiple times. I'd say you've compressed a normal courtship into a pretty short time frame," Sarah grinned. "Besides, who cares what's normal? You two have never been normal." Lila brought the idea to Cole that evening, nervous despite herself. They were walking through the snow-covered streets, watching Silver Falls transform into its evening self, when she finally worked up the courage. "What would you think about buying a house? Here in Silver Falls? Something permanent." Cole stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "A house? You mean, I mean a home. For both of us. Together." The words came out in a rush. "I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other that long. But Cole, I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it. I don't want to imagine it. So if you're willing, if you think you can actually stay in one place without running." He kissed her, cutting off the nervous rambling, and when he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Yes. 1,000 times yes. I want a home with you, Lila Hart. Want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep next to you every night and build something that's ours together. Even though I'm bossy and stubborn and I don't always listen when you try to protect me, especially because of those things." He smiled. "You make me better. Make me believe I can be more than a drifter with a gun and a past. You make me want to be the kind of man who deserves a home. You already are that man. You just needed someone to show you." They found a small house on the edge of town backed up against the forest with a view of the mountains. It needed work. The roof leaked, the porch sagged, the windows stuck. But it was structurally sound, and it was theirs. They spent the winter fixing it up, learning to work together on something other than survival. Cole proved surprisingly handy with carpentry, while Lila had an eye for making spaces feel warm and welcoming. On a cold February morning, with snow still thick on the ground, but the promise of spring in the air, they stood in their front room and looked around at what they'd built. Simple furniture, most of it made by Cole's own hands. Curtains Lila had sewn. A kitchen that smelled of coffee and bread. A bedroom with a real bed and quilts, and the kind of privacy that let them be vulnerable with each other. "It's perfect," Lila said. "It's home." Cole pulled her close. "Our home. And nobody can take it from us." The words should have been comforting, but Lila felt a shadow cross her heart. "Don't say that. Don't tempt fate." "I'm not tempting fate. I'm stating fact." His voice was firm. "We fought too hard, survived too much. We've earned the right to believe in something good." As spring came to Silver Falls, Lila and Cole settled into the rhythms of actual living rather than just surviving. She bought into Mrs. Chen's seamstress shop, making it a true partnership. Cole took a job training horses for one of the mining companies, work that used his skills without requiring violence. They made friends, became part of the community, built the kind of life Lila had dreamed about in her darkest moments in the desert. But even in the midst of peace, Lila couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was unfinished. It nagged at her during quiet moments, kept her awake some nights, until finally she understood what it was. She needed to go back to Red Willow, not to stay, not to reclaim anything, but to face it one last time and say goodbye properly. Cole understood immediately when she told him. When do we leave? You don't have to come. This is my ghost to lay to rest. Your ghosts are my ghosts now. That's what partnership means. He touched her face gently. Besides, you really think I'm letting you ride into your past alone? We've established I'm not good at that. They made the journey in late April, when the desert had transformed from brutal furnace to something almost beautiful, covered in wildflowers and green from spring rains. The ride took 4 days, and with every mile Lila felt herself returning to who she'd been, remembering the girl who'd crept out in the darkness with nothing but desperate courage and an old horse. Red Willow looked smaller than she remembered, more shabby and tired. The boarding house stood empty, windows dark, waiting for whatever buyer Sarah had found. Lila dismounted in front of it and stood staring at the building that had shaped so much of her life. You all right? Cole asked. I think so. Lila moved closer, running her hand along the weathered porch rail. It's strange. I spent so many years hating this place, wanting to escape, but now it just looks sad. Like it's waiting for someone to love it again. Maybe the new owners will. Sarah said it was a young couple, newly married, looking to start a life together. Like us. Like us, Cole agreed. Lila walked through the boarding house one last time, saying goodbye to each room, each memory. The kitchen where her mother had taught her to cook. The small room where she'd hidden her carpet bag and dreamed of freedom. The stairs she'd crept down on that final night, heart-pounding, terrified and determined in equal measure. In her old room, she found something she'd forgotten in her desperate flight, a tin box tucked under a loose floorboard, containing her mother's few pieces of jewelry and a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. Lila sat on the dusty floor and read them, tears streaming down her face, as her mother's voice came alive again through words written years ago. Letters to a younger Silas, before drink and gambling had destroyed him. Letters full of hope and love, and the kind of optimism that believed people could be better than their worst selves. Letters that explained why her mother had stayed with him even when he started to fall apart, because she'd loved the man he'd been and kept hoping he'd find his way back. He never had. But reading the letters, Lila understood her mother better. Understood that sometimes love meant staying even when leaving would be easier, meant believing in someone's potential even when they couldn't see it themselves. It was what Cole had done for her, in his way, what she was doing for him. She tucked the letters carefully into her coat and left the boarding house for the last time, locking the door behind her. Outside, Cole was waiting with the horses, and when he saw her face, he opened his arms without a word. Lila walked into his embrace and let herself cry for everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained, for the mother who'd loved her and the uncle who'd betrayed her, for the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. Ready to go home? Cole asked when her tears had slowed. Lila looked around Red Willow one last time. The dusty streets, the shabby buildings, the places where her childhood had happened. Then she looked at Cole, at the man who'd given her water in the desert and taught her to fight and stayed when staying was harder than running. Yes, let's go home. They rode out of Red Willow as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, and Lila didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing anymore. Everything that mattered was ahead. The mountains, Silver Falls, the small house with the sagging porch, and the man who'd be waiting there with her. The journey back was easier, made lighter by the sense of completion, of circles finally closed. They stopped at Tinsdale's trading post, and Jacob greeted them with genuine pleasure. Heard you two made quite a life for yourselves up in Silver Falls, he said. Heard you face down Briggs Mallory in court and won. That true? Every word, Lila confirmed. Good for you. A man like that needed someone to stand up to him. Tinsdale poured them coffee, his version of hospitality. You know what happened to him after he left the territory? We heard he went back to Virginia. Why? Because word reached me last week that he died. Some kind of accident involving his carriage and a bridge that collapsed. Tinsdale's expression was carefully neutral. Funny thing, that bridge had been inspected just days before. Engineer said it was sound, but somehow it failed right when Mallory was crossing. Lila and Cole exchanged glances. An accident. Or maybe the universe's version of justice. Either way, Mallory was gone, and with him the last real threat to Lila's freedom. "I won't pretend to mourn him," Lila said quietly. "Nobody expects you to." Tinsdale refilled their cups. "Sometimes the world corrects its own mistakes. We just have to be patient enough to let it." They spent the night at the trading post, and in the morning Tinsdale pressed a small package into Lila's hands. "For your home. Something to remember where you came from and how far you've traveled." Inside was a beautiful Navajo blanket, woven in patterns of earth and sky. Lila touched it reverently, feeling the care and skill in every thread. "It's beautiful. But I can't." "You can, and you will. Consider it a gift for someone who refused to accept the life others tried to force on her." Tinsdale smiled. "We need more people like you in this world, Lila Hart. People who fight for their right to choose." They reached Silver Falls as June was transforming into July, the mountains green and lush, wildflowers covering every meadow. The house looked exactly as they'd left it, solid and welcoming, smoke rising from a neighbor's chimney suggesting someone had kept an eye on the place while they were gone. Lila dismounted and stood for a moment, just looking, letting the reality of it sink in. She had a home. She had a partner. She had a life built on her own choices, paid for with her own courage. Nobody could take it from her. Nobody could force her into a role she didn't choose. She was free in every way that mattered. Cole came up beside her, taking her hand. "Welcome home." "Welcome home," Lila echoed, and the words felt like a prayer, like a promise, like the ending of one story and the beginning of another. That night, they lay in their own bed in their own house, wrapped in Tinsdale's blanket, and talked about the future in concrete terms. Maybe in a year they'd think about expanding the house, building on a room that could be a proper workshop for Lila's sewing. Maybe Cole would start his own horse training business instead of working for the mining company. Maybe they'd travel, see some of the country that didn't involve running for their lives. Maybe they'd stay right here in Silver Falls forever, growing old together in the house they'd built with their own hands. Maybe they'd have children someday, though that thought still frightened Lila more than facing down bounty hunters. The idea of being responsible for a small life, of potentially failing the way her uncle had failed her, made her stomach clench with anxiety. "We don't have to decide anything tonight," Cole murmured, clearly reading her tension. "We've got time. All the time in the world." I like the sound of that. Time. Not running out of it, not racing against it, just having it. "We earned it." Lila rolled to face him in the darkness, tracing the lines of his face with gentle fingers. "Do you ever regret it? Helping me that day in the desert? Your life would have been simpler if you'd just ridden past. Simpler, maybe, but emptier, lonelier, less worth living." Cole caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You gave me something I didn't think I could have again. Hope. Purpose. A reason to believe that my past didn't have to define my future. And you gave me freedom, real freedom, not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice." They lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of Silver Falls settling into sleep around them. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and closer by an owl called to its mate. The sounds of wild things living free in the mountains, choosing their own paths, answering to nothing but instinct and will. In the morning, Lila woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd hung curtains in, to the smell of coffee Cole was already making in their kitchen, to the ordinary miracle of another day in a life she'd chosen for herself. She dressed in practical clothes, canvas pants and a cotton shirt, so much more comfortable than the restrictive dresses of her old life, and went to join her partner. Cole handed her a cup of coffee, and they stood at the window together watching the sun paint the mountains gold. "What do you want to do today?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. Whatever we choose." Lila smiled. "That's the beautiful part, isn't it? We get to decide. Every single day." A knock at the door interrupted the moment, and they found Sarah Brennan on their porch, grinning like she'd won a case. "Got news. The boarding house sold for $900. Apparently the buyers loved the location and didn't mind the repairs needed. After fees and such, you're looking at about $300 profit." Lila blinked. "That much?" "That much. So now the question is, what are you going to do with it?" Lila looked at Cole. saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. They talked about this, late at night when the future felt both possible and terrifying. Talked about what they'd do if they ever had real money, real choices. I want to use it to help other women, Lila said slowly. Women like I was, running from forced marriages, from abusive families, from situations where they have no power and no choices. I want to create something, maybe a fund, maybe a safe house, maybe just a network of people willing to help that gives them options. Sarah's grin widened. I was hoping you'd say something like that, because I've been researching, and there are ways to set up charitable organizations, ways to make sure the money goes where it's needed, to women who need it most. You'd help with that? Are you kidding? This is exactly the kind of law I got into the profession to practice. Sarah pulled out a notebook, already scribbling ideas. We could call it the Heart Foundation, or something less obvious if you want to keep your name out of it. We could work with existing organizations or start something new. The possibilities are endless. Over the next months, they built it together. Lila with her lived experience, Sarah with her legal expertise, Cole with his connections to people across the territory who might know women in need. They started small, helping one girl escape an arranged marriage, finding another work and shelter when she fled her father's house. Word spread quietly through networks of women who understood what it meant to need help and be too afraid to ask for it. By the time autumn painted the mountains gold and crimson, the Heart Fund had helped a dozen women find their way to freedom. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it was something. It was taking the pain of Lila's past and transforming it into hope for someone else's future. On a crisp October evening, exactly 1 year after Lila had shot Juniper in that hidden valley and said goodbye to the last remnant of her old life, she and Cole stood on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Do you ever miss it? Cole asked. The excitement, the running, the constant edge of danger? Lila thought about it honestly, examining her feelings the way she'd learned to examine everything, carefully, without flinching from uncomfortable truths. Sometimes, she admitted, sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. When the choices were clear, survive or die, run or fight, there was a purity to that. But I don't miss being hunted. Don't miss being terrified every moment. Don't miss looking over my shoulder wondering when the next threat would arrive. She leaned against him. And what we have now is worth more than any amount of excitement. This is what I was running toward, even when I didn't know it. Peace, choice, partnership, love. Cole wrapped his arms around her, and they stood like that as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. The same stars Lila's mother had told her stories about. The same stars that had watched her desperate flight across the desert. The same stars that had witnessed every step of her transformation from victim to survivor to something more. A woman who chose her own path and helped others choose theirs. I love you, Lila Hart, Cole said quietly. I loved you when you were a half-dead girl in the desert pointing an unloaded gun at me. I loved you when you turned back at the cave instead of running. I loved you when you shot Briggs Mallory to save my life. And I love you now, standing in front of the home we built together, planning ways to save other women the way you saved yourself. I love you too, even when you're being overprotective, even when you want to run instead of stay, even when you doubt you deserve happiness. Lila turned in his arms to face him. We deserve this, Cole. Both of us. We fought for it, earned it with blood and courage, and the stubborn refusal to give up. I know. And his voice said he finally, truly did know. The doubt that had haunted him for so long had finally been replaced by certainty. I know. In the distance, a train whistle sounded. The new rail line that had reached Silver Falls that summer, connecting them to the wider world in ways that felt like possibility rather than threat. Tomorrow, Lila would ride that train to Denver with Sarah, attending a meeting about expanding the Heart Fund's reach. Next week, Cole would start teaching basic horsemanship to miners' children, passing on skills he'd learned over a lifetime of hard travel. Next month, they'd celebrate their first anniversary in the house and talk seriously about what came next. But tonight, they simply stood together and watched the stars emerge. Two people who'd found each other in the desert and built something worth keeping. Two people who'd learned that freedom wasn't just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, and that love wasn't about rescue, but about partnership. Somewhere in the mountains, a wolf howled, wild and free. And in Silver Falls, in a small house with a patched roof and a sturdy porch, Lila Hart and Cole Rourke stood wrapped in each other's arms and listened to it sing. They'd run far enough. They'd fought hard enough. They'd survived long enough to finally, truly live. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The desert had tried to kill Lila that day when she'd fled Red Willow with nothing but $17 and desperate hope. Instead, it had forged her into steel, had brought her coal, had given her the strength to become someone who refused to be owned or broken or diminished. She'd stolen herself away from Briggs Mallory's purchase. She'd ridden through heat and hardship and danger. She'd learned to shoot, to fight, to stand her ground when standing meant risking everything. She'd faced down bounty hunters and criminals, and her own fear of never being enough. And in the end, she'd won. Not because someone had rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself. And in doing so, she'd rescued Cole too, from his guilt, from his loneliness, from his conviction that he didn't deserve gentleness or peace. They'd saved each other. And that, Lila thought, as she stood in the circle of Cole's arms watching their mountains catch the last light of day, was the best kind of ending. The kind where nobody had to be a hero or a victim, where both people chose each other freely and built something neither could have built alone. The kind of ending that was really just a beginning, stretching out ahead of them like the open road, full of possibility and choice, and the steady, enduring love of two people who'd learned the hard way that freedom was worth fighting for, and worth staying for, too. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. The wind whispered through the pines. The small house stood solid and warm against the coming winter. And inside, safe and together, and finally, truly home, Lila and Cole began the rest of their lives.